The Force was ancient, spanning galaxies and binding all living things in an invisible web of energy that Jedi and Sith had studied for millennia. But the Force was not the only ancient power in existence. There were things older than the Republic, older than the Sith Empire, older even than the first beings who learned to touch the mystical energy field. These things existed in the spaces between realities, in dimensions where warmth died and life became a distant memory. The galaxy had forgotten them, as civilizations always forget the nightmares that their ancestors sealed away. But seals, no matter how powerful, eventually weaken, and some things are patient enough to wait for eternity. In the Outer Rim, far from Coruscant's gleaming spires and the Clone Wars' grinding battlefields, a Republic patrol fleet conducted routine hyperspace lane surveys. The Resilient, a Venator-class star destroyer, led a formation of 3 frigates through a sector marked on old star charts as the Frozen Reach, a name whose origin had been lost to time, dismissed as ancient superstition by modern navigators. Captain Davos stood on the bridge, reviewing sensor data with the practiced efficiency of a career officer. His crew, clone troopers, Republic officers, and Jedi advisors, went about their duties with the calm professionalism expected during peacetime patrol. No separatist activity had been reported in this region for months. This was supposed to be a milk run. "Captain," the sensor officer called out, his voice carrying an edge of confusion. "I'm detecting a spatial anomaly at coordinates 379 Mark 5. It's not on any charts, not natural formation, not artificial structure. It's just there." Davos moved to the sensor station, studying the readings. The anomaly appeared as a distortion in space itself, not a wormhole, not a mass shadow, but something that made the instruments flicker and reset, as if they couldn't process what they were detecting. "Could it be separatist stealth technology?" he asked. "Negative, sir. The energy signature is completely unknown. It's reading as..." The officer trailed off, recalibrating his instruments. "Sir, this doesn't make sense. The temperature readings from that region are dropping. Space is already near absolute zero, but this is colder, impossibly colder." Before Davos could respond, the ship's lights flickered. The temperature on the bridge dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Clone troopers' breath began to mist in the air, inside a climate-controlled star destroyer, inside the vacuum of space where temperature was already regulated to perfection. "Engineering report," Davos demanded into his comm. Static answered him. Then through the interference, a voice, but wrong, too cold, too emotionless. "Systems freezing, hull temperature dropping, ice forming on bulkheads. This is impossible. This is..." The transmission cut off. Through the forward viewport, the crew of the Resilient saw it. At first, they thought it was a malfunction, a hologram glitch, some kind of separatist trick. But sensors confirmed what their eyes refused to believe. A figure stood in the vacuum of space itself, not floating, not drifting, standing as if the void were solid ground beneath its feet. It was humanoid in shape, but wrong in every detail. Pale blue-white skin like ancient ice, wearing armor that seemed carved from frozen starlight, with a crown of ice spikes rising from its head, like the horns of some primordial predator. Its eyes glowed with cold blue fire, and where it stood, frost spread outward through space itself, crystallizing the cosmic dust, forming impossible patterns of ice where no ice should exist. "What is that?" someone whispered. The being raised one hand, fingers splayed, and pointed at the Resilient. Frost exploded across the Star Destroyer's hull, not gradually, Not over time, but instantly, the entire forward section of the ship encased in crystalline ice that spread like a living thing. The temperature inside plummeted. Crew members screamed as their breath froze in their lungs. Clone troopers reached for their weapons, but their fingers stuck to the metal, skin freezing to blasters in seconds. Captain Davos felt it, the cold that was more than temperature, the cold that seemed to drain not just heat, but life itself, hope itself, as if the universe was being slowly erased around him. He tried to give orders, tried to call for help, but his voice wouldn't work. His throat was closing, ice forming inside his body. The last thing he saw before the cold claimed him was the being walking across the void toward his ship, walking on nothing, walking with the patient inevitability of winter itself. The Resilient went dark. Its escort frigates, watching in horror, saw the entire Star Destroyer transform into a monument of ice, a crystalline sculpture drifting in space, its hull covered in frost patterns that shouldn't exist, its crew frozen in their final moments of terror. All ships emergency jump to hyperspace, the ranking officer on the frigate Dauntless ordered. Get to Coruscant, warn the Council. Something's out here, something impossible. But as the frigate's hyperdrives engaged, the being gestured again. Ice spread through space at impossible speed, reaching out like grasping fingers towards the fleeing vessels. One frigate's hyperdrive froze mid-calculation, the exotic matter and energy that powered faster than light travel, suddenly solidifying into useless frozen mass. The ship dropped out of hyperspace preparation and went dead, systems failing as the cold invaded every circuit, every power conduit, every living space. Only one frigate escaped, jumping to hyperspace just as the ice reached for it, carrying with it a message that would terrify the galaxy, something ancient, something that existed outside the Force, something that turned warmth and life into frozen death, had entered their reality. On the Resilient, now a tomb of ice, the clone troopers stood frozen in their final positions, weapons raised, faces locked in expressions of terror and confusion. Captain Davos stood at his command station, one hand reaching for the comm, forever preserved in ice. And then, one by one, their eyes opened. Not their natural eyes, but new eyes, glowing with cold blue fire, reflecting nothing of who they had been. The frozen clones moved, their bodies encased in ice that somehow bent and flexed like living tissue. They turned as one, facing the airlock where the being had entered, where frost had simply parted to allow passage without breaching hull integrity. The Night King stood in the corridor of the Star Destroyer, ancient beyond measure, patient beyond human understanding, and utterly silent. He had crossed the void between dimensions, had found a new galaxy full of warmth and life and endless beings to add to his eternal army. He did not speak. He had not spoken in 8,000 years, not since the children of the forest's magic had transformed him from a man into this thing of ice and death. But he did not need to speak. His presence spoke for him. His silence was more terrifying than any words could ever be. The frozen clones stood at attention, awaiting commands that came not through sound but through the cold connection that now bound them to his will. Through their dead eyes, he saw this strange new world, ships that sailed between stars, weapons of light and energy, soldiers bred for war, and something else. Something that permeated everything, an energy field these beings called the Force. For the first time in millennia, something almost like curiosity flickered in the Night King's ancient consciousness. This force was life, was warmth, was the very antithesis of what he was. It would be interesting to see how it reacted to his presence, to see if this galaxy's defenders could stand against the cold when their mystical energy failed them. He raised his hand, and more clone troopers rose from where they'd fallen, ice claiming their bodies, blue fire replacing the light in their eyes. His army was small now, merely a few hundred frozen corpses, but it would grow. It always grew. Every being he touched became another soldier. Every world he claimed became another source of frozen warriors. Winter had come to the stars, and winter did not negotiate. Winter did not compromise. Winter simply spread, patient and inevitable, until nothing remained but ice and silence and the blue-eyed dead. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The emergency transmission from the surviving frigate reached Coruscant 14 hours after the Resilient went dark. By then, 3 more Republic patrols in the Outer Rim had stopped responding to hails. By the time Jedi Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker boarded their cruiser bound for the frozen reach, the casualty reports numbered in the thousands, entire crews simply vanishing, their ships found drifting as frozen monuments or worse, crewed by something that wore the faces of Republic soldiers but moved with unnatural coordination and eyes that glowed with cold blue fire. The negotiator dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the affected sector, and immediately every sensor on the bridge screamed warnings. Temperature readings across the surrounding space showed impossible values, areas of vacuum registering colder than absolute zero, as if the very fabric of reality was being drained of all thermal energy. "That's not possible," Admiral Yularen said, staring at the readouts. "Nothing can be colder than absolute zero. It's a fundamental law of physics." "Apparently," Obi-Wan replied quietly, stroking his beard as he studied the sensor data. "We're dealing with something that doesn't respect fundamental laws." Through the Force, both Jedi could feel something wrong about the region ahead. Not dark side corruption. They'd faced Sith Lords enough to recognize that particular taint. This was different. It was absence, a void where the Force should flow freely, but instead seemed to recoil, as if the living energy field itself was afraid to touch whatever existed in that space. "I don't like this, Master," Anakin said, his mechanical hand clenching on his lightsaber hilt. "The Force feels wrong here, cold, empty." "I feel it too," Obi-Wan acknowledged. "Stay alert. Whatever did this to our fleets isn't using the Force, but it's certainly affecting it." The negotiator approached the last known position of the Resilient. What they found defied comprehension. The Venator-class Star Destroyer floated in space, completely encased in crystalline ice. Not frost on the hull. Actual thick ice, meters deep in places, covering every surface. The ship looked like it had been dipped in liquid nitrogen for centuries, preserved in a frozen moment. But the ice formations weren't random. They formed patterns, spirals, and geometric designs that suggested intelligence, purpose, art created by something with an alien aesthetic sense. "Life signs?" Obi-Wan asked. "Negative on the Resilient," the sensor officer reported. "But sir, I'm detecting movement inside. A lot of movement. Hundreds of figures, all walking in coordinated patterns." "Survivors?" Anakin asked hopefully. "I don't think so, General. The internal temperature is minus 200 degrees. Nothing organic could survive that. But whatever's in there is moving like they're on patrol, like soldiers." Obi-Wan and Anakin exchanged glances. "We're boarding that ship," Anakin decided. "Take a squad of clone troopers. If there are survivors somehow, we get them out. If there's a threat, we eliminate it." Captain Rex assembled his best men, veterans of Geonosis and Christophsis, soldiers who'd seen battle droids, separatist war machines, and dark Jedi assassins. As they prepared to board via gunship, Rex addressed them with typical efficiency. "Unknown hostile force aboard the resilient, extreme cold environment. Thermal suits mandatory. Watch your corners, watch your brothers, and if something moves that ain't us, you put it down." "Understood." "Sir, yes, sir." The clones responded in unison. The Alat gunship approached the Resilient's main hangar bay, or what remained of it. The hangar doors were frozen open, icicles the size of starfighters hanging from the ceiling. The gunship's landing struts crunched on a floor covered in thick ice. The moment the Jedi and clones disembarked, they felt it, cold that penetrated their thermal suits like they were wearing nothing, cold that made their joints ache and their breath come in gasping clouds. The hangar was a frozen cathedral of ice, with Republic starfighters and equipment transformed into crystalline sculptures. "Temperature reading -195 Celsius, Rex reported, his voice distorted by the extreme cold affecting his helmet's audio systems. "How is there still atmosphere? At this temperature, the air itself should be frozen solid." "That," Obi-Wan said, igniting his blue lightsaber for light rather than combat, "is an excellent question." They moved deeper into the ship, and with each step, the wrongness intensified. The Force, usually a constant presence, a warm current Jedi could draw upon, felt distant here, muffled as if something was suppressing it. Anakin tried to reach out with Force sense to detect life forms ahead, but all he felt was cold. Just cold. Then they found the crew. The main corridor was lined with frozen clone troopers, standing at attention in perfect formation. Each was encased in ice from boots to helmet, preserved in the moment of their death. But their eyes were open, glowing blue, watching. "They're not dead," Rex whispered, his weapon trained on the nearest frozen trooper. "How are they not dead?" Before anyone could answer, the frozen clones moved, not with the jerky animation of droids or the stumbling gait of the injured, but with smooth, coordinated precision. They turned as one, raising frozen blasters that shouldn't function, shouldn't even be able to move in their ice-locked grips. "Open fire," Rex ordered. Blue blaster bolts filled the corridor, striking the frozen clones. The impacts chipped ice, damaged armor, even severed limbs. But the frozen soldiers didn't fall. Those that lost legs crawled. Those that lost arms used their bodies as weapons. And those that took headshots simply stood there, eyeless but still aware, still advancing. "They're not alive," Anakin shouted, his lightsaber sweeping through 3 frozen troopers, cutting them into pieces. But the pieces kept moving, kept trying to grab at the living soldiers with frost-covered hands. Obi-Wan used the Force to push back a wave of frozen clones, sending them crashing into the bulkheads. But even as they fell, they began standing again, their ice-encased bodies seemingly immune to damage that would kill normal beings. "Fall back," Obi-Wan commanded. "These aren't men anymore. There's something else." As the Jedi and clones retreated toward the hangar, Rex's boot slipped on the ice. He went down hard, and immediately 3 frozen clones were on him, their hands reaching for his armor, their touch spreading frost across his suit. "Rex!" Anakin grabbed his captain, pulling him away. but not before the ice had spread across Rex's chestplate. The clone captain gasped as the cold penetrated his armor, as ice began forming on the inside of his helmet. Then they saw it. At the end of the corridor, frost forming in the air around it like a living halo, stood something that was neither clone nor droid, nor any species they'd ever encountered. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but its proportions were wrong. Too thin, too angular, like something carved from ice by a mad sculptor. Its skin was pale blue-white. Its armor seemed grown from crystallized frost, and upon its head sat a crown of ice spikes that caught the light from their lightsabers and reflected it in cold, prismatic patterns. Its eyes, those terrible glowing blue eyes, fixed on the Jedi with ancient, patient malevolence. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees. The very air began to crystallize, tiny ice particles forming from nothing and drifting down like impossible snow inside a starship corridor. Anakin raised his lightsaber, the green blade humming with plasma heat. "What are you?" The being did not speak, did not move. It simply stood there, radiating cold and wrongness, and a silence more terrifying than any threat. Then one of the frozen clones, one they'd cut in half, lying in pieces on the floor, suddenly spoke. Its voice was wrong, distorted by frozen vocal cords. But the words were clear. "Winter comes." The being's hand moved, just a slight gesture, and the corridor's bulkheads began to freeze. Ice spread like wildfire, racing along walls and ceiling, moving toward the Jedi and their squad with predatory intent. "Run," Obi-Wan ordered. "Everyone to the gunship now." They ran through corridors that were transforming into ice tunnels, pursued by frozen clones that moved with inhuman coordination. The gunship was just ahead, engines still running, but the ice was faster. It reached the hangar bay before them, spreading across the floor, up the walls, reaching for the LAAT with crystalline fingers. Anakin used the Force to rip a bulkhead door free and hurl it at the pursuing frozen soldiers, buying them seconds. Obi-Wan Force pushed the last of the clones onto the gunship, then leaped aboard himself as the pilot engaged emergency thrust. The LAT burst from the hangar just as ice sealed it shut behind them. Through the rear viewport they saw the Resilient, now completely encased in ice, a frozen tomb drifting in space, and standing in the hangar bay opening, silhouetted against the stars, was that figure, the being with the ice crown, watching them leave with those glowing blue eyes, making no attempt to pursue. Because it didn't need to pursue. It was patient, it had time, and it had something else. Rex collapsed on the gunship floor, convulsing. His armor was covered in frost, and where the frozen clones had touched him, ice was spreading, not on his armor, but under it, through it, into his very body. "Rex!" Anakin knelt beside his captain. Through the Force, he could feel it. Something cold and wrong, trying to claim his friend, trying to turn him into another blue-eyed frozen soldier. Obi-Wan placed his hands on Rex's chest and channeled the Force, not to heal, but to warm, to combat the invasive cold with living energy. It worked, barely. The ice receded, stopped spreading, and Rex gasped as warmth returned to his body. "What? What was that thing?" Rex managed, his voice hoarse. Obi-Wan looked back at the frozen Star Destroyer, at the being still standing in the hangar. "I don't know, but it's not using the Force. In fact, the Force seems to avoid it, and if what we saw is any indication..." He paused, the implications horrifying. It turns the dead into soldiers, and it's now in possession of thousands of clone trooper corpses. Anakin's face went pale. Thousands of corpses that now have blue glowing eyes and take orders from that thing. As the negotiator received them back aboard and jumped to hyperspace, fleeing the frozen sector, none of them noticed the thin layer of frost that had formed on the exterior of their gunship. Frost that seemed to have a pattern, frost that looked almost like a mark, a symbol. The Night King had let them go, had allowed them to escape, because he wanted them to carry a message back to their republic, back to their Jedi Council, back to their galaxy of warmth and life. Winter was coming, and winter did not ask permission. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant had stood for 1,000 generations, a monument to peace and the light side of the Force. Its halls had witnessed celebrations of victory, solemn vigils for the fallen, and countless debates on philosophy and duty. But never, in all its millennia of existence, had the temple experienced what happened when Master Yoda reached out through the Force to sense the threat in the Outer Rim. The council chamber was filled with the Order's most powerful members: Mace Windu, Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Shaak Ti, and others, all gathered to hear Obi-Wan and Anakin's report. The holographic display showed the frozen resilient, the sensor readings of impossible temperatures, and most disturbing of all, the footage from Rex's helmet cam showing the frozen clones with their glowing blue eyes. "Reanimated corpses," Mace Windu said, his voice tight with controlled concern. "You're certain they were dead? Not some form of suspended animation or stasis?" "Dead, Master Windu," Obi-Wan confirmed. "We saw several cut in half. Saw them continue moving without vital organs. They felt wrong in the Force, not dark side corruption, but absence, like holes in the living Force itself." "And this being, this creature with the ice crown?" Ki-Adi-Mundi asked, his tall head tilted in thought. "It never spoke? Never communicated its intentions?" "It spoke once," Anakin interjected, his voice still carrying the chill of that encounter. "Through one of the frozen clones. Just 2 words, 'Winter comes.' Then it let us go, like we weren't even worth pursuing." "Arrogance, perhaps?" Plo Koon suggested. "Or strategy, allowing you to return with fear and tales of this threat." "Show us again, you must," Yoda said quietly from his council seat. "The being itself, its appearance, its presence." Obi-Wan nodded and manipulated the holographic controls. The image shifted to the clearest shot they had. The Night King standing in the corridor, frost forming in the air around him, those terrible blue eyes staring directly into the camera. The moment the image appeared, Master Yoda gasped. It was a small sound, barely audible, but from the ancient Jedi Grand Master who had lived through centuries and faced countless dangers. It was as shocking as a scream. Yoda's eyes widened, his ears drooped, and he gripped his Geimer stick with both hands as if suddenly needing its support. And the temperature in the council chamber dropped. Not gradually. Instantly, 20 degrees in a single second. The Jedi Masters all felt it, ice crystals forming in their breath, frost spreading across the viewport behind them, the very air becoming hostile and wrong. "Master Yoda!" Mace Windu was at the Grand Master's side immediately, but Yoda waved him back with a trembling hand. "Feel it, do you?" Yoda whispered, his voice strained in a way none of them had ever heard. "The cold, the emptiness, reaching across the galaxy it is, sensing my attention, responding to it." The other council members reached out through the Force, trying to sense what Yoda felt, and they recoiled in horror. There was something out there in the Outer Rim, something vast and patient and utterly devoid of warmth or life. or anything recognizable as living force. It was a wound in the force itself, a dead zone that consumed light and heat and life, and it was aware of their attention. It was looking back at them. The frost on the viewport spread further, forming patterns, spirals, and geometric shapes that seemed almost like language, like writing in a script older than any known civilization. The council chamber's climate controls screamed warnings as they struggled to compensate for temperatures that shouldn't be possible in a sealed, regulated environment. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The temperature stabilized. The frost remained but spread no further, and in the force that terrible attention turned away, dismissing them like they were beneath notice. Yoda slumped in his seat, and for the first time in living memory, the 800-year-old Jedi Master looked old, looked tired, looked afraid. "What was that?" Shaak Ti asked, her voice barely controlled. "Master Yoda, what did you sense?" Yoda was silent for a long moment, his eyes closed, gathering his strength. When he finally spoke, his words chilled the council more than any temperature drop could. A memory it awakened, old, so very old, before the Republic, before the Sith, before the Jedi even. He opened his eyes, and they held a depth of ancient fear. Stories my own master told me when a youngling I was. Legends from before recorded history of beings that existed when the Force was young, beings not of the Force but before it, alongside it, things the Force itself fears. "The Force doesn't fear," Ki-Adi-Mundi objected. "The Force is an energy field, not a sentient." "Wrong, you are," Yoda interrupted, his tone sharp. "Living, the Force is, conscious in ways beyond our understanding, and afraid it can be when faced with that which can end life itself, with that which turns living force into nothing." Mace Windu examined the frost patterns on the viewport, his tactical mind already working through scenarios. "We need to understand this threat, its capabilities, its weaknesses, its origin. Obi-Wan, Anakin, you said it turns the dead into soldiers. How many of our people has it already claimed?" "3 full fleets," Obi-Wan replied grimly. "Approximately 15,000 personnel, all presumed lost. If this being can reanimate them all as those frozen warriors we encountered, then it has an army of 15,000 enhanced soldiers that feel no pain, require no food or rest, and can survive in vacuum," Anakin finished. "And every soldier we send against it becomes another recruit for its army." The implications hung heavy in the air. This was a military nightmare, an enemy that grew stronger with every engagement, that turned your own forces against you. "Contact the Chancellor, we must," Yoda said, his strength returning somewhat. "A threat to the Republic this is, but also—" He hesitated, something that sent warning ripples through the Force. "Count Dooku, inform him we should." "Inform the Separatists." Mace Windu's tone was sharp with disbelief. "Master Yoda, they're our enemy. Why would we warn them?" "Because enemy of all life this thing is," Yoda replied simply. "Jedi, Sith, Republic, Separatist. Distinctions it does not make. Warmth and life it seeks to end. All of it. Unite against it we must, or consumed separately we will be." Before anyone could respond, an urgent transmission came through. Commander Cody's face appeared in hologram form, his expression tight with barely controlled panic. "Masters, we have a situation. 3 more Republic cruisers just dropped out of hyperspace at the Rishi station. They're not responding to hails, and sensors show they're covered in ice. The entire hulls are frozen. and there are figures moving inside them. "How many cruisers?" Obi-Wan asked, though he already dreaded the answer. 3 Venator-class destroyers, full crews and clone battalions. That's another 12,000 personnel, General, and they're heading toward the Rishi Moon outpost. Sir, our men there are defenseless. It's just a listening post with a skeleton crew. Anakin was already moving toward the door. We need to evacuate them now, before those frozen ships reach them. "No," Mace Windu said firmly. "We evacuate Rishi Station, yes, but we also need to destroy those ships. Completely. We cannot allow this threat to continue adding to its army." "Destroy them?" Anakin turned back, his face conflicted. "Those are our men on those ships, our brothers." "They're not our men anymore," Mace said, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "They're weapons in the hands of an enemy we don't understand. And if we don't stop them now, they'll reach populated systems. Imagine this thing reaching Coruscant, reaching a planet with billions of beings." The horrifying scenario played out in everyone's minds. The Night King walking through Coruscant's streets, touching civilians, raising an army of billions. An unstoppable tide of frozen dead consuming the galaxy system by system. "Master Windu is correct," Obi-Wan said reluctantly. "Those ships must be destroyed, and any personnel infected with whatever this cold is cannot be allowed to spread it further." Anakin's mechanical hand clenched. He thought of Rex, nearly claimed by that invasive cold, of the clone troopers who'd given their lives for the Republic, now turned into things with glowing blue eyes. There has to be another way. We're Jedi. We find ways to save people, not destroy them. "Save the living we must," Yoda said gently. "But these are not living. Gone, they are. And their bodies now serve that which would end all life. Mercy, sometimes, is letting go." The decision was made. A Republic fleet would be dispatched to Rishi Station with orders to evacuate all personnel and then destroy the 3 frozen cruisers with concentrated turbo laser fire. No boarding actions, no rescue attempts. Complete obliteration was the only acceptable outcome. As the council members filed out to oversee the operation, Obi-Wan lingered with Yoda. The Grand Master sat in his council seat, staring at the frost patterns on the viewport, patterns that were slowly fading but leaving behind a faint outline, like a scar on the transparent steel. "Master Yoda," Obi-Wan said quietly, "these legends you mentioned, the beings from before the Force, do they say anything about how to fight such things?" Yoda was silent for a long moment. Finally, fight them they could not, seal them away only, lock them in places where life could not reach, where the Force did not flow, prison dimensions, frozen voids between realities. He looked up at Obi-Wan with eyes that held terrible understanding and hoped that the seals would hold forever. But this one got out. Yes, or was released, or found a crack in reality to squeeze through, matters not. Here it is, and fight it we must. Though how? Yoda shook his head. Study we must. Research ancient texts. Find what our ancestors knew about such things before knowledge was lost to time. Obi-Wan looked at the frost patterns again, seeing in them something almost like script, like a message written in a language no living being could read. Do you think it's intelligent? Does it think, plan, strategize? Intelligent. Yoda's laugh was bitter. Ancient beyond measure it is. Patient, strategic. It let you escape, yes? Wanted you to bring back fear, wanted the council to sense it, It plays games, Obi-Wan, long games, because time means nothing to it. Then we're not just fighting an army of frozen soldiers. We're fighting something that's been alive since before our civilization existed, something that's had millennia to perfect the art of conquest. Yes, Yoda said simply, and worse, something the Force itself cannot touch, cannot sense properly, cannot fight directly. He gripped his Geimer stick and rose slowly. When the Jedi face darkness, the Force we trust. But this is not darkness, it is absence. It is the end of light, the end of warmth, the end of life itself. And against such things, the Force is. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The Force was helpless. And if the Force was helpless, what chance did flesh and blood stand against winter eternal? As Obi-Wan left the council chamber, he passed a viewport showing Coruscant's gleaming cityscape, billions of beings going about their lives, unaware that in the outer rim, something ancient and patient and utterly merciless had begun its slow march toward their worlds. In the depths of space, aboard the frozen Resilient, the Night King stood in the captain's ready room, surrounded by his army of blue-eyed dead. He did not speak, did not need to speak. His will flowed through the cold, through the ice that connected all his frozen soldiers, commanding them with thoughts older than language. The frozen clone troopers moved with purpose now, operating the ship's systems with dead hands, navigating with dead eyes, learning, adapting, understanding this galaxy's technology, its weapons, its ships, and in the outer rim, on a dozen worlds, snow began to fall. Impossible snow on planets that had never seen winter. Farmers and colonists looked up at the sky in wonder and confusion as white flakes drifted down from clear skies. Wonder that turned to horror when the snow touched their skin and they felt the cold that was more than cold. Felt their bodies beginning to freeze from the inside out. Felt blue fire igniting behind their eyes. Winter was spreading, and the galaxy was completely unprepared. Tatooine had been a desert world for millennia. Twin suns scorching endless dunes. Moisture so precious that farmers used atmospheric vaporators just to survive. A place where water was worth more than credits. And the very concept of cold was alien to generations of inhabitants. The planet's average temperature hovered around 43 degrees Celsius during the day, dropping to a still warm 20 at night. Until the day the snow came. Anakin Skywalker stood in the cockpit of his Jedi starfighter, staring through the viewport at his homeworld with an expression of absolute disbelief. Below him, covering Mos Eisley's dusty streets and the endless dune sea beyond, was a blanket of white snow. Impossible, reality-defying snow falling from Tatooine's cloudless sky, accumulating on sand dunes that had never felt moisture, coating the moisture farms in crystalline frost. "This can't be happening," Anakin whispered. "Tatooine doesn't have weather systems that produce precipitation. The atmospheric moisture content is less than 1%. There's no mechanism for this." "And yet it's happening," Obi-Wan replied from his own starfighter, flying in formation beside his former Padawan. "The laws of nature seem to mean very little to whatever we're facing." They'd been en route to reinforce the Rishi Station evacuation when the emergency transmission came through. Multiple Outer Rim worlds reporting sudden, impossible weather changes. Tatooine was the most dramatic. A desert planet experiencing its first snowfall in recorded history. But it wasn't just snow. The report spoke of temperatures dropping 100 degrees in minutes, of colonists freezing to death in their homes, of entire settlements going silent. And in every report, survivors spoke of figures walking through the snow, figures with glowing blue eyes. The Night King was spreading faster than anyone had predicted, faster than should be possible, even with captured Republic ships. It was as if his presence alone was enough to extend his domain, to transform worlds into frozen wastelands merely by existing near them. As Anakin's starfighter descended toward Mos Eisley, he could see people in the streets below, Jawas, Rhodians, humans, and dozens of other species, all staring up at the falling snow with expressions ranging from wonder to terror. Some tried to catch the flakes, laughing at the novelty. Others, wiser or more experienced with cold climates, were already fleeing indoors, sensing something wrong about this impossible weather. Anakin landed near the old slave quarters where he'd spent his childhood, where his mother Shmi had once lived before Cliegg Lars bought and freed her. The moment his canopy opened, he felt it, cold that bit through his Jedi robes, so alien on this world of heat and sand that it felt like stepping onto another planet entirely. He ignited his lightsaber, using its plasma heat to melt the snow accumulating on his shoulders, and ran toward the Lars homestead. Obi-Wan followed, his own blade active, both Jedi reaching out through the Force to sense danger. What they sensed made them both stop in their tracks. The Force was retreating, not absent, not corrupted, but actively pulling back from this region of Tatooine, like living tissue recoiling from poison. And in the space where the Force withdrew, there was nothing, just empty cold and a silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. "The moisture farms," Anakin said, pointing toward a cluster of evaporators in the distance. "People live there. We need to warn them." They ran through snow that was already ankle-deep, their breath misting in air that had been too dry to hold moisture just hours ago. The nearest homestead belonged to the Lars family. Not the same one Anakin knew, but relatives, extended clan members who worked the unforgiving land for meager returns. The homestead's dome was covered in frost. The door was frozen shut. Anakin used the Force to wrench it open and immediately wished he hadn't. Inside, the family was frozen. Mother, father, 3 children, all seated around their dinner table as if time had stopped mid-meal. Their eyes were closed, their skin blue-white with frost, their bodies encased in ice so thick it had preserved them perfectly. They looked like sculptures, like art pieces created by a mad artist obsessed with death. And then their eyes opened, all of them, glowing blue. "Get back!" Obi-Wan pulled Anakin away as the frozen family rose from their chairs with mechanical precision. The father reached for a blaster on the wall, his frozen fingers somehow gripping the weapon, his dead eyes fixed on the Jedi with cold intelligence. "They're dead," Anakin said, his voice hollow. "I knew them. That's Aaron Lars and his family. I met them years ago. They're dead, but they're moving." "The same as the clones on the Resilient," Obi-Wan confirmed. "The cold doesn't just freeze them, it reanimates them. Turns them into soldiers for that thing." More figures emerged from the deeper chambers of the homestead. Neighbors, farmhands, a protocol droid that was now covered in ice, its photoreceptors glowing blue instead of yellow, all moving with the same eerie coordination, all advancing on the Jedi. Anakin's rage ignited like a sun going nova. These were his people, his homeworld, the place he'd suffered as a slave, yes, but also the place that had forged him, that had taught him resilience. And now this thing, this Night King, was defiling it, was turning Tatooine's hardy colonists into frozen puppets. His lightsaber swept through the frozen Lars family, cutting them down with surgical precision. But even as they fell, even as their frozen bodies shattered into pieces, those pieces kept moving, a severed arm crawling toward them, a head with glowing eyes watching from the floor. "We can't save them," Obi-Wan said grimly. "Anakin, they're gone. All we can do is warn others and evacuate whoever we can." But Anakin wasn't listening. He was staring out the homestead entrance at Mos Eisley in the distance, at the snow that was falling heavier now, accumulating faster. And in the Force, despite its retreat, he could sense it, death spreading through the city, people freezing, people dying, people rising again with blue fire in their eyes. "How many?" Anakin asked, his voice tight. "How many people live on Tatooine?" 200,000 permanent residents, Obi-Wan replied. "Maybe another 100,000 transient population. Smugglers, bounty hunters, refugees. Why? Because they're all going to die," Anakin said flatly. "This snow isn't natural, it's him. He's here, not his army, him. That thing is on Tatooine right now, and he's turning the entire planet into his frozen army." As if in response to Anakin's words, the temperature dropped another 20 degrees. The snow became a blizzard, visibility dropping to almost nothing. And through the swirling white, figures appeared, dozens of them, then hundreds, walking through the storm with glowing blue eyes. Colonists, moisture farmers, Jawas still wearing their robes, now frozen solid, Tusken Raiders with ice coating their traditional wrappings, cantina patrons, spaceport workers, slave masters and slaves alike, all equal now in frozen death, all serving the same terrible master. "To the ships," Obi-Wan commanded. "We need to get airborne, call for Republic support, and establish a quarantine around this planet immediately." They ran through the blizzard, lightsabers cutting through frozen colonists that threw themselves at the Jedi with suicidal disregard for their own preservation. An ice-covered Gamorrean guard charged them, and Obi-Wan's blade took its head off, but the body kept running for 3 more steps before collapsing. Anakin reached his starfighter and was climbing into the cockpit when he saw it, a figure standing atop a sand dune that was now a snow-covered hill. Even through the blizzard, even at this distance, there was no mistaking what it was. The Night King stood motionless, his ice crown catching what little light penetrated the storm, his glowing blue eyes fixed on Anakin. Around him, frost spread in geometric patterns, transforming sand to ice, creating crystalline structures that rose from the ground like frozen monuments. For a moment, Jedi and ancient evil regarded each other across the snowstorm. Anakin felt the urge to attack, to fly his starfighter directly at that thing and end it with proton torpedoes. But something held him back. Not fear, but a sense that this being wanted him to attack, was waiting for it, had prepared for it. The Night King raised one pale hand, and the storm intensified. Lightning crackled through the snow, not normal lightning, but blue-white electrical discharges that froze whatever they touched. One bolt struck near Obi-Wan's starfighter, flash freezing the sand into a pillar of ice 20 meters high. "Anakin, go!" Obi-Wan's starfighter engines roared to life. "We can't fight him here, not like this." Anakin took one last look at the Night King, at the thing that was destroying his homeworld, and made a promise to himself. "I will find a way to kill you. Whatever you are, wherever you came from, I will end you." Then he fired his engines and climbed into Tatooine's atmosphere, breaking through clouds that shouldn't exist on a desert world, leaving behind a planet that was rapidly becoming a frozen hell. From orbit, the transformation was even more horrifying. The snow wasn't just falling in one region, it was spreading across the entire planet. Satellite imagery showed white overtaking brown at a visible rate, desert becoming tundra, the twin suns' heat seemingly unable to stop the advance of impossible winter. "How is this possible?" Anakin demanded into his comm. "A planet's climate doesn't change this fast. It takes years, decades for global weather patterns to shift." "He's not changing the climate," Obi-Wan replied, his voice heavy with realization. "He's overriding it, imposing his will on reality itself. This isn't weather, Anakin. It's something else, something that defies natural law." Their comms crackled with emergency transmissions, not just from Tatooine, but from a dozen other Outer Rim worlds. Ryloth reporting temperature drops in its equatorial regions, Geonosis's droid foundries freezing solid, Christophsis's crystal towers covered in ice, Kashyyik's forests experiencing snowfall for the first time in the Wookiees' recorded history. "He's everywhere," Anakin said, horror dawning. "How can he be everywhere at once?" "Perhaps he's not," Obi-Wan theorized, studying the incoming reports. "Perhaps his presence, his power, extends beyond his physical location, like the Force but wrong, inverted, a field of cold and death that spreads from him like radiation, transforming everything it touches." Before either could respond, a new transmission cut through. Admiral Yularen aboard the Negotiator, his voice strained. "Generals, we have a situation. Count Dooku's flagship just dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the Tatooine system. He's requesting to speak with you, both of you, immediately." Anakin and Obi-Wan exchanged glances across their cockpit-to-cockpit video link. Count Dooku, the Separatist leader, former Jedi Master turned Sith Lord, architect of the Clone Wars, was here, seeking an audience. Now. "This is a trap," Anakin said flatly. "Probably," Obi-Wan agreed. "But if he's here, it means the Separatists are aware of the threat. And if Master Yoda was correct about needing to unite against this enemy, you're actually considering working with him, with a Sith." "I'm considering that if we don't, the entire galaxy will freeze. Politics and old grudges mean nothing if there's no civilization left to govern." Minutes later, aboard the Negotiator, they stood in the holographic communication chamber. Count Dooku's image materialized before them. Tall, elegant, his curved lightsaber hilt visible at his side, his expression uncharacteristically grave. "Kenobi, Skywalker." Dooku's cultured voice carried no mockery, no smug superiority, just cold assessment. "I assume you're aware of what's happening across the Outer Rim." "We're standing on the front lines of it," Obi-Wan replied. "What do you want, Dooku?" "What I want is irrelevant. What matters is survival. The Separatist Council has tasked me with investigating this anomaly. We've lost contact with 6 of our fortress worlds. When droid scouts reached them, they found the planets frozen. Our battle droid armies turned into ice sculptures, millions of credits in military hardware rendered useless." "And you think we can help you?" Anakin asked skeptically. "No," Dooku said bluntly. "I think we must help each other, or we'll all die." He gestured and his hologram shifted to show footage from a Separatist battle cruiser. What it depicted made even the hardened Jedi pause. The Night King stood aboard a Separatist dreadnought, surrounded by hundreds of frozen super battle droids. But these weren't just ice-covered droids. They'd been transformed, their mechanical bodies encased in crystalline ice that seemed to enhance them, make them deadlier. Their optical sensors glowed blue, They moved with coordination no droid programming could achieve. And in the background, frozen separatist commanders, Neimoidians, Geonosians, Moons, all standing at attention with glowing blue eyes. "I attempted to negotiate with it," Dooku said, his voice carrying something that might have been embarrassment, "to offer an alliance. The Separatists need soldiers, and this being clearly knows how to create them. I thought perhaps we could reach an understanding." "Let me guess," Obi-Wan said dryly. "It didn't respond well to your proposition." Dooku's hologram shifted again, showing what happened next. The Night King had simply gestured, and every droid on the bridge had frozen solid. Then the Separatist officers, then the ship itself. Systems shutting down as ice invaded circuits and power conduits. Dooku had barely escaped in a boarding shuttle before the entire dreadnought became a frozen tomb. "It serves no one," Dooku said quietly. "Not the Republic, not the Separatists, not the Jedi or the Sith. It simply ends things, turns life into death, warmth into cold, being into nothing. I've fought Jedi, faced your council's strongest warriors, and never felt fear. But this thing..." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was subdued. "It spoke to me, through one of my frozen officers. Do you know what it said?" "What?" Anakin asked, despite himself. "It said, 'Your war is meaningless. Your sides are irrelevant. Winter makes all equal. All serve the cold in the end.'" Dooku's hologram met their eyes, and then it turned and walked away, leaving me alive. "Letting me go. Do you understand what that means?" "It means you weren't worth killing," Anakin said. "It means," Dooku corrected, "that we're not even considered threats. Not the Jedi, not the Sith, not the Republic or Separatists or any faction in this galaxy. We're just resources, bodies waiting to be harvested, worlds waiting to be frozen." The transmission ended with Dooku's final words. "My master is aware of this threat, and even he is concerned. Contact me when you're ready to discuss an alliance, because unless we work together, there won't be a galaxy left to fight over." Anakin and Obi-Wan stood in silence as the hologram faded. Below them, through the viewport, Tatooine continued its transformation, a world of fire and sand becoming a monument to eternal winter. And somewhere on that frozen surface, the Night King stood in the center of his spreading domain, silent and patient, adding 200,000 new soldiers to his army. The Jedi Temple had stood as a beacon of light and wisdom for millennia, but now it was becoming something else, a fortress under siege by an enemy that defied every principle the Order held sacred. In the 3 days since Tatooine's fall, 17 more worlds had reported impossible weather changes. The outer rim was freezing, system by system, and with each fallen world, the Night King's army grew exponentially. The temple's grand halls, normally filled with the quiet meditation and purposeful movement of Jedi Knights, now echoed with urgent footsteps and tense discussions. Masters who had spent decades studying philosophy and Force techniques were suddenly forced to become generals and strategists, planning for a war unlike any the Order had ever faced. And something else was happening. Something that made even the Council's most powerful members deeply uneasy. Snow was falling on Coruscant, not everywhere, not yet, but in isolated pockets across the planet-wide city. White flakes drifted down from the climate-controlled sky. The first reports came from the lower levels, industrial districts, refugee sectors, places where infrastructure was old and maintenance was spotty. Local authorities dismissed it as atmospheric processing malfunctions, coolant leaks from air circulation systems. But Mace Windu stood at a temple viewport, watching snow accumulate on the landing platform outside, and knew better. The Force rippled with wrongness, with the same cold absence that had preceded every other world's transformation. The Night King wasn't just spreading through military conquest. His presence was bleeding into the galaxy like poison through water, touching even the Republic's heart. Behind him, the council chamber had been converted into a war room. Holographic projections showed the outer rim, with system after system marked in blue: frozen, lost, compromised. Red markers indicated Republic fleets, green showed Separatist forces, and yellow marked the scattered Jedi teams, trying to evacuate civilians before the cold claimed them. Master Yoda stood before the largest display, his ancient eyes scanning the data with growing concern. Faster it spreads than anticipated, not just through conquest, through existence, as if reality itself bends to accommodate it. "We're losing ground," Ki-Adi-Mundi reported, his voice tight. "For every world we evacuate, 2 more report temperature anomalies, and the refugees, some of them are already infected." "Infected?" Anakin asked sharply. He'd returned from Tatooine still haunted by the sight of his homeworld's transformation, still feeling the cold that had tried to claim Rex. "That's the term medical teams are using," Shaak Ti explained, bringing up medical holoscans. "Exposure to the cold doesn't just cause frostbite. There's something else, a foreign energy signature that invades living tissue at the cellular level. It spreads slowly, taking hours or even days, but eventually." She highlighted areas on the scan where tissue had crystallized. "They freeze from the inside out, and when they die, they rise again with blue eyes." "Can it be stopped?" Obi-Wan asked. "Can the infection be purged?" "Force healing works if applied immediately and continuously. We've had some success with concentrated thermal treatment combined with Force techniques, but it requires constant effort from a trained Jedi, and we don't have enough healers for the number of infected." Shaak Ti's expression was grim. "We're having to make choices about who to save." The words hung heavy in the air. The Jedi Order, dedicated to preserving all life, was now practicing triage on a galactic scale, letting some die so others might live. "What about the military response?" Mace Windu asked, turning to Admiral Yularen's hologram. "Your report on the Rishi Station engagement." Yularen's image flickered, showing the exhaustion of a man who'd been commanding fleets non-stop for days. "We managed to destroy the 3 frozen cruisers before they reached the station, but it cost us. The ships fought back, their weapon systems still functional despite being completely frozen. And when we finally broke through their hulls, the frozen crew, they boarded our ships through the breaches. We lost 2 frigates to boarding actions before we could contain them." "Contain how?" Anakin pressed. "Flamethrowers," Yularen said bluntly. "We stripped every incendiary weapon from our arsenal. Plasma torches, thermal detonators set to sustained burn. Even jury-rigged the life support systems to pump superheated air through compromised sections. Fire and extreme heat are the only things that seem to permanently stop them." Plo Koon leaned forward. "And the frozen ships themselves, what happened when you destroyed them?" "That's the disturbing part. When the cruisers were hit with sustained turbo-laser fire, they exploded as expected. But the debris, it continued to move. Frozen body parts, severed limbs, even just heads, all trying to reach our ships, clawing through space toward any source of warmth or life." Yularen's voice dropped. We had to vaporize every piece. Complete molecular disintegration was the only way to ensure they couldn't reform or infect others. The Council absorbed this information in troubled silence. They were fighting an enemy that turned their own weapons against them, that transformed death into an advantage, that seemed to mock the very concept of conventional warfare. "What about the source?" Obi-Wan asked. "The Night King himself. Have we located him?" "That's where it gets complicated," Mace Windu said, manipulating the holographic display. Multiple markers appeared across the outer rim, dozens of them. "We have confirmed sightings of the being with the ice crown on 17 different worlds, simultaneously." "That's impossible," Anakin objected, "unless there are multiple Night Kings or he's not bound by normal physical limitations," Yoda finished. "Project himself across vast distances he can, or perhaps exist in multiple places at once. Understanding we lack. But clear one thing is, destroy his physical form in one place, and elsewhere he remains." A new hologram appeared. Chancellor Palpatine, his grandfatherly features drawn with concern. "Masters, I've been monitoring your reports with growing alarm. The Senate is in chaos. Senators from affected systems are demanding action, while others refuse to believe what's happening. Some are calling it separatist propaganda, an elaborate hoax designed to destabilize the Republic." "It's no hoax, Chancellor," Mace Windu said firmly. "We've lost 17 worlds and counting. Millions are dead. And unless we find a way to stop this threat, there won't be a republic or confederacy left to govern." "Then perhaps," Palpatine said carefully, "it's time to consider unconventional alliances. Count Dooku has reached out to me through back channels. The Separatists are suffering losses as well. He's proposing a temporary ceasefire, a joint Republic Separatist task force to combat this threat." The suggestion sent ripples of shock through the Council. Alliance with the Separatists, with the very forces they'd been fighting for 3 years. "Work with Dooku?" Anakin's voice was sharp. "The man who betrayed the Order? Who's orchestrated countless atrocities? The man who also understands what extinction looks like," Palpatine countered. "My friends, I don't make this suggestion lightly, but we must ask ourselves, what good is pride if we're all frozen corpses with glowing blue eyes?" Yoda tapped his Geimer stick thoughtfully. "Foreseen this I have. Knew I did that unite we must or fall separately, but trust Dooku we cannot. Even now, schemes within schemes, he plots." "Then we don't trust him," Mace Windu said pragmatically. "We use him, pool our resources, share intelligence, coordinate strikes against the frozen worlds. But we watch him carefully, and the moment this crisis passes, assuming we survive, we return to the status quo." "There's another consideration," Obi-Wan added quietly. "Dooku mentioned his master is concerned about this threat. He means Darth Sidious, if even the Sith are worried." The name hung in the air like a curse. Darth Sidious, the phantom Sith Lord who'd orchestrated the Clone Wars from the shadows, whose identity remained unknown despite years of Jedi investigation. If even he saw the Night King as a threat, the situation was more dire than they'd imagined. "Find Sidious we must," Yoda said, "but later. First, survive we must. Chancellor, arrange the meeting with Dooku. Conditions: neutral space, limited attendees. Both sides retain full military alert status." "I'll see to it personally," Palpatine promised. His hologram flickered, then added, "And Masters, there's one more thing. The snow falling on Coruscant. It's spreading. Lower levels are reporting frozen inhabitants, gangs, refugees, maintenance workers, all found dead with blue eyes. We're trying to contain it, but the capital itself is being invaded, Mace Windu finished grimly. How long before the infection reaches the upper levels? The Senate? This temple? Unknown, Palpatine admitted. But I'm authorizing evacuation protocols for non-essential personnel. If Coruscant falls, the Republic falls, Obi-Wan said. The symbolic impact alone would shatter morale across every loyal system. As Palpatine's hologram faded, the council members looked at each other with expressions that mirrored the same thought. They were running out of time. The Night King's advance was accelerating, and despite all their power, all their connection to the Force, the Jedi seemed helpless to stop it. Anakin moved to the viewport, watching snow continue to fall on Coruscant's upper platforms. In the distance, he could see clone trooper patrols equipped with flamethrowers, establishing perimeter checkpoints, screening refugees fleeing the lower levels. The Republic's capital was becoming a militarized zone, preparing for a siege from an enemy that might already be inside the walls. Master Yoda, Anakin said without turning, these legends you mentioned, the beings from before the Force, did they say anything about weakness? Anything we can use? Yoda was quiet for a long moment. Sealed away they were, not destroyed. Thought they could not be in direct combat, but... He paused, searching ancient memories. Rituals there were, sacrifices, not of life, but of something else. Knowledge lost to time. Fragments only remain. Then we find those fragments, Mace Windu declared. Every archive, every holocron, every ancient text in the Order's possession gets analyzed. Shakti, coordinate with the Jedi archives. I want every master who specializes in ancient history working on this. What about the possibility of destroying the Night King directly? Ki-Adi-Mundi asked. We know heat and fire can harm his soldiers. What if we hit him with concentrated firepower, orbital bombardment, solar plasma? Tried that, the Republic has, Yoda said sadly. On Geonosis, orbital strike authorized. 3-star destroyers focused all batteries on the foundries where he was reported, vaporized the entire complex. He looked up with ancient eyes. And when the dust cleared, standing in the crater, he was unharmed, as if the attack never happened. The revelation sent a chill through the room, colder than any snow. The Night King couldn't be destroyed by conventional weapons. Fire harmed his soldiers, but not him, and he could apparently project his presence across multiple worlds simultaneously. Then how do we fight him? Anakin demanded, frustration boiling over. If weapons don't work, if the Force can't touch him, if he can be everywhere at once, what's the point? Are we just supposed to watch while he freezes the entire galaxy? No, Obi-Wan said firmly, placing a hand on his former Padawan's shoulder. We adapt, we learn, we find the weakness that every being must have. Nothing is truly invincible, Anakin, not even something as ancient as this. But privately, Obi-Wan wondered if that was true. What if they were facing something that genuinely couldn't be killed? What if the best they could hope for was survival, retreat, sealing themselves away in the warmest core worlds while the outer rim became a frozen wasteland? A warning klaxon suddenly blared through the temple. Clone Commander Fox's voice came over the intercom. Security breach, lower temple levels, multiple intruders with unknown energy signatures, all Jedi to defensive positions. Anakin's lightsaber was in his hand instantly. They're here. He sent his frozen soldiers to the temple itself. The council members moved as one. years of combat training overriding the shock of having their sanctuary invaded. They rushed to the temple's lower levels, where security holocams showed a terrifying sight. Frozen beings, a mix of former Coruscant citizens, clone troopers, and even protocol droids, had breached the temple's sub-level maintenance entrances. They moved through the ancient corridors with eerie purpose, their glowing blue eyes fixed on some unseen goal, frost spreading from their bodies to coat stone walls that had stood for millennia. Jedi Knights engaged them in the corridors, lightsabers blazing. The plasma blades cut through frozen flesh easily enough, but the beings didn't stop. Dismembered limbs continued crawling, severed heads watched with glowing eyes, and worst of all, any Jedi who touched them for too long felt the invasive cold beginning to spread. Master Windu's purple blade swept through 3 frozen attackers in a single strike, but his expression was grim. They're not trying to fight us. They're moving deeper into the temple. It's like they're searching for something. The holocron vault, Yoda said suddenly, his eyes widening with realization. After our knowledge, they come. Ancient texts, information about what he is, how to fight such things. Destroy it before we learn he would. The council members raced toward the vault, but they were too late. The massive doors, sealed with force locks that should have taken hours to breach, were covered in spreading ice. The locks were freezing, the mechanisms failing, and through the widening gap, frozen hands reached in toward the collected wisdom of the Jedi Order. Anakin didn't hesitate. He thrust his hand forward, and force lightning dark side power he'd touched before in moments of desperation arced from his fingers. The electricity superheated the air, flash burning the frozen attackers and melting the ice on the vault doors. "Anakin!" Obi-Wan shouted, shocked at seeing his former student use Sith techniques. "It's stopping them!" Anakin snapped back, pouring more power into the lightning. The frozen beings recoiled from the heat and electricity, their ice-covered bodies cracking and steaming. Other Jedi joined him, not with lightning, but with concentrated force pushes that drove the attackers back, while temple guards equipped with flamethrowers created a wall of fire between the invaders and the vault. The frozen beings stopped their advance. They stood there, dozens of them watching the Jedi with blue glowing eyes. And then, in perfect unison, they all turned and walked away. Not fleeing, not defeated, but simply leaving as if they'd accomplished their purpose. "What just happened?" Mace Windu demanded. "Why did they retreat?" Yoda's expression was deeply troubled. "Retreat, they did not. Tested us, they did. Learned our defenses. Showed him what we protect, where we are weak." He looked at the vault doors, now scarred with ice and frost. "Next time, ready he will be, and next time, stop him we may not." In the aftermath, as temple maintenance crews worked to repair the damage and medical teams treated frost-touched Jedi, the council reconvened. The vote was unanimous. They would meet with Dooku, would ally with the Separatists, would do whatever was necessary to survive the long night that was descending on their galaxy. Because pride meant nothing if you were dead, and winter was coming for them all. The meeting place was neutral by necessity and paranoia by design. A decommissioned Republic monitoring station on the edge of the Bespin system, far enough from either faction's territory that betrayal would be difficult, close enough to civilization that complete abandonment was unlikely. Mace Windu's shuttle approached the station with 4 Jedi escort fighters, while a separatist diplomatic cruiser emerged from hyperspace on the opposite vector, flanked by vulture droids that kept their weapons powered down, but tracking systems very much active. The station itself hung in the orange glow of Bespin's upper atmosphere, a skeletal structure of metal and transparasteel that had once monitored trade routes but now served as a stage for the impossible. The Jedi and the Sith meeting to discuss alliance. Inside the station's main conference chamber, the air was thick with tension and the artificial chill of life support systems working overtime. Mace Windu stood on one side of the long table, flanked by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ki-Adi-Mundi. Across from them, Count Dooku cut an elegant figure in his dark cape, his white beard and aristocratic bearing giving him the appearance of a philosopher rather than a warlord. Beside Dooku stood General Grievous, the cyborg general whose mechanical breathing filled the uncomfortable silences. And behind them both, barely visible in the shadows, stood a figure that made every Jedi's hand twitch toward their lightsabers. Asajj Ventress, Dooku's assassin. Her pale skin seemed even whiter than usual, her eyes cold as she watched the Jedi with predatory interest. "Gentlemen," Dooku began, his cultured voice breaking the silence, "I appreciate you accepting my invitation, though I suspect invitation is too gracious a word. Desperation brings us together, not diplomacy." "We're not here to exchange pleasantries, Dooku," Mace Windu said flatly. "You claim the Separatist forces are suffering losses from this threat. We're here to verify that claim and discuss potential coordination." Dooku manipulated a control on the table, bringing up a holographic display. System after system appeared in blue, frozen worlds in Separatist space. The numbers were staggering. Nearly twice as many Separatist systems had fallen compared to Republic ones. "As you can see," Dooku said, "the Outer Rim is my faction's stronghold, which means we're bearing the brunt of this invasion. Entire droid armies have been frozen solid, their programming corrupted by something we don't understand. And worse, the organic population of our worlds, they rise again. Frozen, but moving. Our intelligence suggests over 40 billion have already been lost." 40 billion, Obi-Wan repeated, the number almost incomprehensible. "And your master, Darth Sidious, what does he say about this threat?" Dooku's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been fear. "My master is concerned. He has encouraged this alliance. In fact, he insists upon it." "How generous of him," Mace said sarcastically. "The puppet master allowing his puppets to cooperate while he pulls strings from the shadows." "Careful, Master Windu," Dooku warned, though without real heat. "We may be allies of circumstance, but I won't tolerate—" "Won't tolerate what?" Mace interrupted. "The truth. You're a Sith Lord who plunged the galaxy into war. Your master is the architect of countless deaths, and now you want us to believe you're acting out of concern for the galaxy's welfare. I want you to believe I'm acting out of concern for my own survival," Dooku corrected sharply. "As are you. Don't mistake this for redemption, Master Windu. I'm not here to apologize for my choices or seek forgiveness. I'm here because even Sith Lords prefer to keep existing, and this Night King threatens to end existence as we know it." General Grievous's mechanical cough laugh echoed through the chamber. "The Jedi are so predictable, always seeking moral high ground, even when drowning in ice. Perhaps if you'd spent less time philosophizing and more time preparing, your worlds wouldn't be falling so quickly." Obi-Wan's hand moved to his lightsaber hilt. "And perhaps if your master hadn't relied so heavily on droid armies, Your forces wouldn't have become statues the moment the temperature dropped. Gentlemen, a new voice interrupted. Chancellor Palpatine's hologram appeared at the head of the table, diplomatic and grandfatherly. May I remind you that recriminations serve no purpose here. We're facing an existential threat. Our petty conflicts must be set aside. Petty? Ki-Adi-Mundi bristled. 3 years of war, millions dead, entire star systems devastated. You call that petty? Compared to total extinction? Palpatine's hologram turned to face him. Yes, Master Mundi, I do. This Night King doesn't care about our politics, our grievances, our carefully crafted battle plans. He simply takes, consumes, transforms, and unless we stand together, he'll take everything. The Chancellor's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket, because he was right, and they all knew it. Dooku pulled up another hologram, this one showing a frozen world with massive ice structures rising from its surface. This was Ryloth. The Separatists controlled it until 6 days ago. Now look at it. The image zoomed in, revealing impossible architecture. Spiraling towers of ice that reached into the upper atmosphere. Massive walls of frozen material stretching across its entire continents. And everywhere, frozen beings working in perfect coordination to build something. They're not just killing, Obi-Wan said quietly. They're constructing. But what? Fortresses. Ventress spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. Or temples. We've observed similar structures on every frozen world. They serve multiple purposes, command centers, population processing facilities, and she paused, clearly disturbed by what she was about to say. Ritual sites. Ritual! Mace Windu leaned forward. Explain. Ventress manipulated the display, showing aerial footage of one of the ice structures. At its center was a massive circular chamber, and within that chamber, thousands of frozen beings stood in perfect geometric patterns, their blue eyes all focused on a central point where something pulsed with cold light. Every 6 hours this happens, Ventress said. The footage showed the frozen beings, all raising their arms in unison, and the light at the center intensified. When they do this, nearby systems report sudden temperature drops. It's like they're spreading the cold through ritual, through some kind of dark ceremony we don't understand. Dark side, Ki-Adi-Mundi said, but not Sith. This is something older, something wrong. Dooku nodded slowly. My studies of the Sith archives revealed fragments, references to beings that existed before the Force was understood, before the Jedi and Sith divided into light and dark. The texts called them the eternal cold, entities that fed on the absence of life, that turned death itself into a weapon. And how were they defeated? Mace Windu demanded. The texts must have said something. They didn't, Dooku admitted. Or if they did, those portions were lost or deliberately destroyed. The only reference I found was a single line in a holocron from Darth Bane. The cold cannot be killed, only contained. Fire drives it back, but sacrifice drives it away. Sacrifice, Obi-Wan repeated. What kind of sacrifice? Unknown, Dooku said, frustration clear in his voice. The holocron was fragmentary, but it suggested that the last time these beings appeared, someone or something gave up everything. Their life, their power, their very existence. And in doing so, created a seal that held the cold at bay for millennia. Until now, Mace Windu said grimly, something broke the seal. Or the seal simply expired, Palpatine's hologram suggested. Time erodes all things. even force-based protections. If the seal lasted 10,000 years, whoever created it might not have expected it to fail. They couldn't warn their descendants because they were gone. The implications hung heavy in the recycled air. If the seal had been created through sacrifice, would another sacrifice be required to restore it? And who would make such a sacrifice? Who could? General Grievous broke the somber silence with his rasping voice. Enough history lessons. We're here to discuss military coordination. I propose a joint task force, Republic and Separatist ships, working together to evacuate threatened worlds and destroy frozen structures before they spread. Agreed, Mace Windu said, but we need protocols, rules of engagement. The moment this crisis ends, we return to our respective sides. No opportunistic attacks, no intelligence gathering, no positioning for advantage. You want us to trust each other, Dooku said with a thin smile. How delightfully naive. I want us to survive, Mace corrected. Trust is irrelevant. We'll operate under mutually assured destruction protocols. Any betrayal results in immediate military response from the other side. The only thing keeping this alliance intact is the knowledge that the Night King will destroy whoever fights alone. Dooku considered this, then nodded. Acceptable. I'll provide you with codes for Separatist fleet movements, locations of our remaining strongholds, and intelligence on frozen world locations. You'll do the same. We'll establish a joint command center, Obi-Wan added. Neutral territory, real-time information sharing, and we need to coordinate research efforts. Anything we learn about the Night King's weaknesses gets shared immediately. There's one more thing, Ventress said, her expression troubled. The beings I mentioned, the ones working in ritual patterns. We captured one, tried to interrogate it, learn something about their purpose or the Night King's plans. And, Mace Windu prompted. It spoke, Ventress said quietly, just once in a language we didn't recognize. But our protocol droids managed a rough translation. She pulled up a text file, and the words appeared in Basic. Winter falls, the long night comes, the living will join the eternal cold, all warmth ends, all life stops, all will be still. The king will sit upon a throne of frozen stars, and silence will reign forever. The message sent chills through everyone present, even Grievous, whose mechanical body shouldn't have been capable of such responses. A prophecy, Ki-Adi-Mundi said, or a promise. Does it matter which? Dooku asked. The meaning is clear. He doesn't just want to conquer, he wants to end everything. Life itself offends him somehow. He won't stop at the Outer Rim, won't stop at Republic or Separatist space. He'll spread until every world is frozen. Every being is dead and reanimated. Every star is extinguished. Then we have to find the ritual, Obi-Wan said urgently. The sacrifice mentioned in the holocron. It's the only reference we have to something that actually worked against these beings. I'll have my people search the Separatist archives, Dooku said. Any Sith texts that reference the cold containment or ancient seals. You search the Jedi records. Between us, perhaps we can piece together what was done before. And the military campaign? Grievous demanded, clearly impatient with all the talk of ancient history. What's the tactical plan? Mace Windu brought up a tactical display of the galaxy. We create a defensive line here. He highlighted a series of systems that formed a rough arc between the frozen outer rim and the mid-rim. Evacuate everything beyond this line. Every civilian, every resource, every ship. Turn those worlds into a buffer zone. And when the buffer zone freezes, Dooku asked, we fall back to the next line and the next, fighting retreats, buying time for research, for evacuation, for finding the weakness that will let us end this. Mace looked at the display grimly. We're not trying to win, not yet. We're trying to survive long enough to figure out how to win. A war of attrition, Grievous said, almost appreciatively. The Republic and Separatists finally agree on something, how to lose slowly instead of quickly. Do you have a better plan? Ki-Adi-Mundi challenged. The cyborg general was silent for a moment, his mechanical breathing the only sound. Then, no, I don't, and that terrifies me more than I'll admit. Coming from a being who'd fought Jedi masters without fear, who'd led armies across countless battlefields without hesitation, the admission was sobering. Chancellor Palpatine's hologram spoke one final time. Then we're agreed. Joint command, shared intelligence, coordinated evacuation, and military response. I'll have my staff draft formal protocols and distribute them to both sides. May the Force be with us all. A pause. And yes, Count Dooku, that includes you. The hologram faded, leaving just the 6 beings in the conference room, Jedi and Sith, organic and machine, all united by fear of something worse than each other. As the meeting broke up and both sides returned to their ships, Obi-Wan paused beside Dooku. Do you really think we can win this? The former Jedi Master, now Sith Lord, looked at him with weary eyes that held more honesty than Obi-Wan expected. I think we can delay the inevitable, perhaps long enough for some miracle to occur. But when? He shook his head. I've studied ancient evils, Master Kenobi. I've delved into Sith secrets that would make your masters weep. And everything I've learned tells me the same thing. Beings like the Night King don't lose. They're defeated through sacrifice, through costs so high that the victory feels like defeat. Someone will have to give up everything to stop this. The only question is, who will it be? Before Obi-Wan could respond, Dooku turned and strode away, his cape billowing dramatically despite the station's still air. On the flight back to Coruscant, Mace Windu sat in silence, reviewing the intelligence Dooku had provided. Frozen worlds, corrupted armies, ritual structures spreading across the galaxy like a disease. And at the center of it all, a being who couldn't be killed by any known means. Master Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi said quietly, when Dooku mentioned sacrifice, do you think he meant what I think he meant? Mace was quiet for a long moment before answering. I think he meant that someone, perhaps multiple someones, will have to die permanently, give up their Force essence, cease to exist in any form in order to seal the Night King away again. Not martyrdom, not becoming one with the Force, just ending. That's not the Jedi way, Ki-Adi-Mundi protested. We don't believe in sacrifice for the greater good. Every life matters. We'd find another way. Would we? Mace looked at him steadily. If the choice was between one Jedi ending forever and the entire galaxy freezing to death, what would you choose? Ki-Adi-Mundi had no answer. As they approached Coruscant, the planet looked different from orbit. White patches covered sections of the surface, snow that shouldn't exist on a world with climate control. The infection was spreading slower than on outer rim worlds, but inevitable. And somewhere in the darkness beyond known space, the Night King watched, waited, spread his cold, added to his army with every death, with every frozen corpse that opened blue eyes and rose to serve. Winter was no longer coming. It had arrived. Section 7. The evacuation of Coruscant began at dawn, though dawn was a relative term on a planet that hadn't seen an unfiltered sunrise in 10,000 years. The cityscape that covered every inch of the planet's surface now served as a maze of panic and desperation, as billions tried to flee a world that was dying by degrees. Anakin Skywalker stood on a landing platform in the Temple District, watching refugee ships lift off in an endless stream. Clone troopers maintained order at the embarkation points, but it was a fragile thing. People were scared. They'd seen the reports from the Outer Rim, seen the footage that had leaked despite the Senate's attempts at information control. They knew what was coming. "It's not enough ships," Ahsoka Tano said beside him, her montrals twitching with agitation. His former Padawan had returned from a mission to Ryloth just hours before, one of the last ships to escape before that world went completely dark. "We could evacuate for months and still not get everyone off Coruscant. Where do we even send them?" "Core worlds," Anakin said tiredly. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight, coordinating evacuations, fighting off frozen infiltrators in the lower levels, and searching the archives for any reference to the ancient cold. Corellia, Chandrila, Alderaan, planets with warmer climates, strong infrastructure, and defensive capabilities, though honestly, he trailed off, not wanting to voice the thought. "Honestly, you think those worlds will freeze too," Ahsoka finished for him, just more slowly. Anakin didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, he looked at his Padawan. Former Padawan, he corrected himself, though the distinction felt meaningless now, and saw the exhaustion that mirrored his own. Ahsoka had been at the temple when the first frozen attackers breached the sub-level entrances. She'd fought alongside temple guards, her two lightsabers carving through frozen flesh that kept trying to reform, kept reaching for the living even when dismembered. "How many did we lose at Ryloth?" he asked. Ahsoka's face went carefully blank. "The entire population, millions. By the time we arrived with the evacuation fleet, the ice structures were already built. The frozen beings were already working in those ritual patterns. We tried to save some of them, got maybe a few thousand off-world before the fighters attacked." "Fighters?" "Frozen Twi'lek pilots in frozen ships. They flew in perfect formation, no shields, no life support, just weapons and targeting systems somehow still functional despite being encased in ice. Shot down half our transports before we could jump to hyperspace." Her voice cracked slightly. "I watched a transport full of children get hit, saw it break apart, and then I watched through the viewport as the frozen pilots just sat there in space in their cockpits watching us leave, not chasing, just watching with those blue eyes." Anakin put a hand on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could, which felt pitifully inadequate. They'd been trained as Jedi, as warriors and peacekeepers, but nothing had prepared them for this. "How did you comfort someone when the galaxy itself was dying?" a communication alert chirped. Anakin activated his comlink, and Obi-Wan's voice came through tight with urgency. "Anakin, we need you in the council chamber, now, and bring Ahsoka." They ran. The council chamber had become something unrecognizable. The circular room where Jedi Masters once meditated on the nature of the Force was now a war room crammed with holographic displays, military officers, and an atmosphere of controlled chaos. Master Yoda stood at the center, looking somehow even more ancient than usual, his ears drooping with exhaustion. Beside him, Mace Windu was arguing with a holographic Admiral Yularen, while Shaak Ti reviewed medical reports with an increasingly grim expression. "What's happened?" Anakin asked as he and Ahsoka entered. "Everything and nothing," Obi-Wan said, gesturing to one of the displays. The Joint Republic Separatist Task Force engaged frozen fleets near Bothawui. We destroyed 17 cruisers. But they just kept coming, and then they stopped, Mace Windu interrupted. Simultaneously, every frozen ship, every frozen being on every compromised world, they all stopped moving at exactly the same moment. Anakin felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "Why?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Shaak Ti said. For approximately 12 minutes, every frozen entity in the galaxy became completely motionless. Even their eyes stopped glowing. It was as if someone had pressed a pause button on the entire invasion. "And then?" Ahsoka asked. "They started again," Yoda said quietly. "But different they are, organized differently, moving with greater purpose, as if," he struggled for the words, "as if individual they were before, but now parts of one mind they are." A new hologram appeared, this one showing Count Dooku, transmitted from his flagship somewhere in the expansion region. "Masters, I can confirm the same phenomenon in separatist space. During those 12 minutes, we took the opportunity to destroy several frozen strongholds. But when the entities reactivated, they responded with coordinated precision we haven't seen before. It's as if the Night King was calibrating them, connecting them all to himself. Making them extensions of his will," Obi-Wan said. "Not just an army, but a single distributed consciousness with billions of bodies." "Can such a thing be possible?" Ki-Adi-Mundi asked. "Even the most powerful Force users can't maintain that many mental connections simultaneously." "A Force user, no," Yoda agreed. "But the Night King, a Force user he is not. Beyond the Force he is. Outside it. Something we don't understand, with abilities that defy what we know to be possible." Anakin moved to one of the tactical displays, studying the latest intelligence. The frozen territories had spread significantly in just the past few days. Nearly a quarter of the galaxy was now under the Night King's control. But something about the pattern bothered him. "Look at this," he said, highlighting certain systems. "He's not spreading randomly, there's a pattern. He's avoiding certain systems, bypassing them entirely to take others. Why?" Everyone gathered around the display, studying the highlighted areas. Anakin was right. The Night King's advance showed clear preferences. Some wealthy, populated worlds had been taken immediately, while others, equally valuable, remained untouched. "Environmental factors," Obi-Wan suggested. "Maybe he has more difficulty freezing certain atmospheric compositions, or planets with more solar radiation. Or," Dooku's hologram said thoughtfully, "he's selecting targets based on criteria we don't understand. These avoided systems, what do they have in common?" Shaak Ti ran the analysis, and the results made everyone uncomfortable. They're all planets with significant Force-sensitive populations. Jedi temple worlds, planets where Force traditions are strong, systems with high concentrations of Force-attuned beings. "He's avoiding Force nexuses," Mace Windu said, understanding dawning, "not because he can't take them, but because he's saving them for later, taking the non-Force-sensitive populations first, building his army, and then overwhelming the Force-strong worlds with sheer numbers," Anakin finished. "By the time he reaches Coruscant, the Temple, any planet where the Jedi might make a stand, he'll have billions of frozen soldiers to throw at us." "Smart," Ahsoka admitted reluctantly. Terrifying, but smart. Yoda tapped his Geimer stick sharply. Worse it is than smart. Strategic it is. Implies planning, implies intelligence we hoped he lacked. Not mindless force of nature, the Night King. Thinking he is. Plotting. A new alarm began blaring, this one from the temple's deep archives. Shakti brought up the security feed, and what they saw made several council members reach for their lightsabers instinctively. Jocasta Nu, the elderly Jedi archivist, was fighting for her life in the restricted vault section. Frozen beings, former temple maintenance workers by their clothing, had somehow breached the archive security and were systematically destroying holocrons. Ancient texts were being frozen solid, then shattered. Wisdom accumulated over 10,000 years being obliterated before their eyes. "They're destroying our knowledge," Obi-Wan said, horrified. "Our ability to research, to find information about the cold. He's taking it away." "Not just destroying," Yoda said, watching closely, "selecting. Look, certain holocrons they ignore, certain texts they leave untouched. Only specific knowledge they destroy." Anakin zoomed in on the feed. Yoda was right. The frozen beings were methodical, checking datapad labels before destroying some items and bypassing others entirely. They're destroying anything related to ancient history, pre-Republic era, the time when the cold last appeared. "Move, we must," Yoda declared. "Save what we can, fight them off. But," he looked around at the council members, "understand this. Cover his tracks. The Night King does. Remove evidence of his past defeat. Hide knowledge of how to stop him." "Which means," Mace Windu said grimly, "there is a way to stop him, and he's afraid we'll find it." That thought, that the seemingly invincible Night King actually feared something, actually had a weakness, galvanized the Jedi into action. Anakin, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and a dozen temple guards raced to the archives while the council coordinated the broader defense. They arrived to find Jocasta Nu backed into a corner, her lightsaber blade pressed against a frozen Ithorian who seemed not to care that the plasma was boiling away his chest. The being just kept walking forward, pressing into the blade, reaching for the archivist with frozen hands. Anakin's lightsaber took the creature's head off, but the body kept moving. Ahsoka severed both arms at the shoulder, but the torso still advanced. It was Obi-Wan who finally ended it, using the Force to hurl the frozen remains into a thermal incinerator shaft, where even frozen undead couldn't survive complete molecular disintegration. They came through the ventilation system, Jocasta Nu reported, breathing hard, modified their bodies somehow, compressed themselves to fit through spaces that should be impossible. They're targeting the pre-Republic section, everything we have on ancient conflicts and sealed threats. "Save what we can," Anakin ordered the temple guards. "Grab every holocron, every datapad, every physical text. We'll sort through it later, but right now, we need to preserve anything he's trying to destroy." The Jedi worked frantically, filling cargo crates with ancient knowledge, while fighting off wave after wave of frozen attackers. It was surreal. Lightsaber combat in a library, ancient texts being scattered across the floor, the smell of burning flesh mixing with the musty scent of old books. Ahsoka was defending a corridor when she noticed something odd. One of the frozen attackers, a former Bothan scholar based on the frost-covered robes, was holding a specific holocron, not destroying it, holding it, protecting it. "Master," she called to Anakin, "this one's different." Anakin cut his way through two frozen guards and reached Ahsoka's position. The Bothan stood motionless except for its eyes. which tracked their movements with eerie intelligence. In its frozen hands was a dark blue holocron, ancient by design with inscriptions that hurt to look at. "Drop it," Anakin commanded, knowing it was futile. The Bothan's mouth opened and frost poured out, along with words in a voice that wasn't its own. A voice like glaciers grinding against each other, like the death of warmth itself. "The children of the forest sealed us away. The last Greenseer gave his life, but the children are gone. The singers are silent. The old magic is broken. There is no seal this time. There is only the long night, only the cold, only us." Then the Bothan crushed the holocron in its frozen hands, and knowledge that might have saved the galaxy turned to glittering powder that drifted through the air like deadly snow. Anakin struck faster than thought, his lightsaber removing the Bothan's head and both arms before the creature could speak again. But the damage was done. The holocron was destroyed, and its message delivered. "Children of the forest," Obi-Wan said, arriving beside them. "Greenseers, what is he talking about?" "Terms we don't recognize," Jocasta Nu said, frantically searching through her data terminals. "Not in any Jedi records I can access. Either they've been deleted or they predate our archives entirely." "The Jedi Order is 25,000 years old," Ki Adi-Mundi protested, arriving with more reinforcements. "What could predate our records?" "Civilizations that rose and fell before the Jedi existed," Yoda said quietly, materializing in the archive entrance despite his age and size. "Before the Republic formed, before spaceflight, before memory itself. These children of the forest, these Greenseers, names from the galaxy's youth they are, from when worlds were separate, when species didn't know each other existed." "Can we find information about them anywhere?" Ahsoka asked desperately. "Other archives, other planets, anything." Jocasta Nu shook her head slowly. "The Night King's been at this longer than we realized, cross-referencing recent destructions across multiple worlds' archives. He's been systematically destroying this specific information everywhere. Libraries on Alderaan, archives on Corellia, data vaults on Chandrila, anything related to pre-Republic ancient history, specifically anything about the Long Night or the Cold. It's all being targeted and eliminated." "So he's not just building an army," Mace Windu said over comms. "He's waging information warfare, ensuring we can't learn from history how to defeat him." "But he made a mistake," Anakin said, looking at the spot where the Bothan had stood. "He told us something. These children of the forest, these Greenseers, they did seal him away before, which means it can be done. We just need to find out how." "Without access to the knowledge he's destroying," Obi-Wan pointed out, "how do we research something when all evidence of it is being systematically erased?" The question hung in the recycled air of the archive, unanswerable and damning. Around them, temple guards continued loading crates with whatever texts had survived, but everyone knew they were salvaging fragments of a larger truth that was slipping away. Outside the temple, snow continued to fall on Coruscant. The lower levels were completely frozen now. Billions of inhabitants either dead or transformed into blue-eyed servants of the cold. The upper levels were holding, but barely. Clone troopers with flamethrowers manned every checkpoint, and evacuation ships continued their endless exodus to worlds that might buy them a few more weeks of warmth and life. In his private quarters, Anakin stood at the window, looking out at the dying city. Padme was somewhere down there, organizing civilian evacuations with her Senate contacts refusing to leave despite his pleas. She was pregnant. He'd sensed the twin life forces growing within her even before she confirmed it, and the thought of losing her, of losing their unborn children to the cold, made him want to burn the galaxy to ashes if only it would stop the Night King's advance. "You're thinking about her," Obi-Wan said, entering without knocking. Old habits from when Anakin was his Padawan. "I'm thinking about everyone," Anakin replied, not bothering to deny it. The secret of his marriage to Padme seemed trivial now, with extinction on the doorstep. Every person on every world. How do we save them, Master? How do we fight something that can't be killed? "The same way we always have," Obi-Wan said, standing beside him at the window. "We do our best. We try. We don't give up, even when giving up seems like the only logical choice." "And if our best isn't enough?" Obi-Wan was quiet for a long moment. Then we make it enough. Somehow. We'll find these children of the forest, or information about them. We'll discover what the Green Seers did. We'll learn the ritual, the sacrifice, whatever it takes. He looked at Anakin with eyes that held more determination than despair, because the alternative is unacceptable. Down in the Separatist flagship, Count Dooku stood in his meditation chamber, communing with his master through the Force. Darth Sidious's presence was oddly muted, cautious in a way Dooku had never sensed before. "Master," Dooku said, "the Night King destroyed a holocron in the Jedi archives, mentioned beings called the Children of the Forest and something called a Green Seer. Do you know these terms?" There was a long pause before Sidious responded, and when he did, his voice carried an emotion Dooku never thought he'd hear from his master: uncertainty. "Ancient legends," Sidious said carefully, "from before the Sith, before the Jedi. I researched them once in my youth. Found fragments in the oldest holocrons, then watched as those holocrons mysteriously disappeared from the archives I studied. Something has been erasing this knowledge for millennia." "Then it's true," Dooku said. "The Night King has been active in some form for thousands of years, working to ensure no one could learn how to defeat him if he returned. Which means," Sidious continued, "that whatever the Children of the Forest did, whatever sacrifice the Green Seers made, it was powerful enough to frighten a being who seems otherwise invincible. We must find that knowledge, apprentice, even if the galaxy must burn in the process." "And if we can't?" Another pause. Then, in a voice Dooku had never heard from his master, a voice touched by something that might have been fear, "then even the Sith will end. And I find that unacceptable." The communication ended, leaving Dooku alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that for the first time in his life, for the first time perhaps in galactic history, the Jedi and Sith truly needed each other, because winter had come and night was falling on them all. The Joint Command Center was established on Bothawui, one of the last major worlds still holding against the cold. The choice was strategic, far enough from the frozen territories to be defensible, close enough to coordinate rapid response, and importantly, a world neither Republic nor Separatist could claim complete control over. Neutral ground in a war that now seemed like a petty squabble compared to the existential threat freezing the galaxy. The command center itself was an architectural oddity, half Republic military installation, half Separatist fortress, connected by hastily constructed corridors that served as demilitarized zones where soldiers from both sides passed each other with wary glances and hands, never far from weapons. Clone troopers and battle droids shared guard duties. Jedi Knights coordinated with separatist generals, and in the center of it all, in a massive circular chamber that might have been designed for this exact purpose, representatives from both factions gathered around a holographic display of the galaxy, a galaxy that was dying in increments. Anakin stood beside Admiral Yularen, studying the tactical situation. The blue markers representing frozen territory had spread like a fungal infection, creeping, persistent, and seemingly unstoppable. Nearly 40% of known space was now under the Night King's control. "We're not fighting an army," Yularen said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We're fighting entropy. Every world that falls adds to his forces. Every being that freezes becomes another soldier. It's mathematically impossible to win a war where your losses strengthen your enemy and your victories don't weaken him." "Then we don't fight his army," Anakin replied. "We fight him directly." "The Night King himself?" General Grievous's mechanical voice cut in. The cyborg general stood across the table, his multiple arms folded in a posture that managed to convey skepticism despite his mechanical nature. "We've tried that. Orbital bombardments, concentrated turbo laser strikes, even plasma bombs that should have vaporized entire regions. He doesn't even acknowledge the attacks, just stands there and watches." "Because we're using the wrong weapons," Obi-Wan interjected, joining the discussion. "We've been treating this like a conventional war, armies against armies, ships against ships. But the Night King isn't conventional. He's not even alive in any sense we understand." "So what do you suggest, Master Kenobi?" Count Dooku asked, his aristocratic voice carrying across the command center. "Should we ask him nicely to stop?" "I suggest," Obi-Wan said calmly, refusing to rise to the bait, "that we focus on information warfare. He's been systematically destroying historical records for a reason. Whatever the Children of the Forest did, whatever ritual the Green Seers performed, that's our weapon. We need to find it." "We've been searching," Shaak Ti reported, pulling up a new display. "Every surviving archive, every holocron we managed to save, every fragment of pre-Republic history we can access. And we've found almost nothing. The erasure is comprehensive. Whoever these Children of the Forest were, they've been scrubbed from galactic memory." "Not quite," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Asajj Ventress entering the command center, flanked by separatist security droids. She moved with her usual predatory grace, but there was something different about her, a wariness, perhaps even fear. "My master tasked me with researching Sith archives, holocrons that the Jedi don't even know exist, dark knowledge, forbidden rituals, things that would make your precious order weep." "And?" Mace Windu prompted, his hand resting on his lightsaber hilt. Ventress produced a data pad, placing it on the central table. "I found references, not to the Children of the Forest directly, but to what they opposed. There's a Sith text dating back nearly 30,000 years. That describes an ancient enemy called the Eternal Adversary, a being of pure anti-life, existing before the Force was understood, feeding on the absence of heat and motion. She manipulated the datapad. An ancient text appeared, written in a language so old that the translation matrices struggled to interpret it, but fragments were readable. The adversary cannot be slain by blade or flame, for it is the absence of these things. It cannot be fought with the Force, for it exists beyond the Force's influence. The only victory comes through sacrifice, the giving of self so completely that nothing remains, not even memory. Sacrifice, Ki-Adi-Mundi said, reading over her shoulder. There's that word again, but sacrifice of what? Life, power, what could possibly seal away a being like the Night King? Everything, Yoda said quietly. The ancient Jedi Master had been meditating in the corner, so still that many had forgotten he was there. Now he opened his eyes and they held a depth of sorrow that made everyone uncomfortable. Not just life, not just power, existence itself. The sacrifice that sealed the cold away before, erased were those who made it. Not dead, not one with the Force, unmade, as if they never were. The implications settled over the command center like a funeral shroud. To sacrifice your existence, not martyrdom, not becoming one with the Force, but ceasing to be entirely erased from reality itself. It was worse than death. It was the end of everything you were, are, or ever could be. That's insane, Anakin said flatly. You're talking about suicide on a metaphysical level, destroying your own soul. No one would do that. They did, Dooku said, surprising everyone by agreeing with Yoda. The children of the forest, the green seers, they unmade themselves to seal the cold away. And because they unmade themselves so completely, no record of them remains. They didn't just die, they never were. The galaxy forgot them because reality itself forgot them. But traces remain, Ventress added, bringing up more fragments from her research. Anomalies in the historical record, gaps in pre-Republic timelines, species that should exist but don't, planets with ruins that don't match any known civilization. The children of the forest left echoes even if they themselves are gone. Ahsoka, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. If they unmade themselves, how do we know the ritual even worked? Maybe the Night King was just dormant for 30,000 years. Maybe he's impossible to truly defeat. No, Obi-Wan said thoughtfully. If he was just dormant, he wouldn't be so desperate to destroy information about them. He fears them, fears what they did, which means it worked, at least partially. They sealed him away, and now the seal is broken. So we need to remake the seal, Mace Windu said. Find the ritual, perform it again, force him back into whatever prison held him before. And volunteer for extinction in the process, Anakin said bitterly. Who decides that? Who gets to erase themselves from reality for the greater good? The question hung unanswered in the air, because everyone knew what it implied. Someone in this room, someone among the Jedi or Sith or both, would have to make that sacrifice, would have to choose to never have existed, taking with them any impact they'd had on the galaxy, any relationships they'd formed, any meaning their life had held. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring. The holographic display shifted, showing real-time sensor data from the mid-rim. 3 systems, Kashyyyk, Trandosha, and Ord Mantell, were all reporting simultaneous temperature drops. He's accelerating, Admiral Yularen said, studying the data. 3 systems at once. He's never done that before. Not acceleration, Grievous said, zooming in on the tactical display. Coordination. Look at the positions. These 3 systems form a triangle around Botha-Wui. He's surrounding us. The realization spread through the command center like ice water. They'd thought Botha-Wui was far enough from the frozen territories to be safe. They'd been wrong. The Night King had been planning this, positioning his forces, and now he was closing the trap. We need to evacuate, Dooku said immediately. This entire facility, everyone here, if Botha-Wui falls. If Botha-Wui falls, we lose the command center, Mace Windu interrupted. We lose coordination between Republic and Separatist forces. The alliance collapses and we fight separately, which is exactly what he wants. Then we stand and fight, Anakin declared. Defend Bothawui with everything we have. Show him he can't just take whatever he wants. With what? Yularen asked harshly. We have maybe 40 capital ships in orbit. The defense fleet is stretched thin across a dozen systems, and if the pattern holds, Bothawui will freeze in less than 72 hours. We can't evacuate the entire planet in that time. We don't evacuate the planet, Obi-Wan said, a desperate plan forming. We evacuate the leadership, the command staff, the people necessary to maintain the alliance. Everyone else, he couldn't finish the sentence. Everyone else we abandon to the cold, Shakti finished for him, her voice hollow. Billions of Bothans left to freeze and rise as the Night King's soldiers. It's logical, Ventress said, her pragmatism cutting through the moral anguish. Save the few who matter, sacrifice the many who don't. The Sith have been saying this for millennia. We are not Sith, Mace Windu snapped, rounding on her. We don't measure people's worth by their strategic value. Every life matters. Every being will die anyway if we don't make hard choices, Ventress shouted back. Your Jedi philosophy is beautiful, Master Windu, but it's not going to stop the galaxy from freezing. Sometimes the only choice is who dies first and who dies later. The argument was interrupted by a new development on the holographic display. One of the Republic scout ships, monitoring the frozen territories near Kashyyyk, had sent back footage before going silent. The Night King was there. Not a projection, not a remote presence, the actual being, standing on the surface of Kashyyyk's frozen forests. And he wasn't alone. Around him stood figures that made even the hardened military officers present step back in shock. Frozen Wookiees, hundreds of them, standing in perfect geometric formations, their massive bodies covered in ice, their eyes glowing that terrible blue, and at their center, towering over them all, was a Wookiee chieftain, one they recognized. Tarful, Obi-Wan said, his voice tight. He was the leader of Kashyyyk's defense, one of the bravest beings I've ever known. And now Tarful stood as the Night King's champion, a general of the frozen dead, his massive form radiating cold as he raised one frozen arm and pointed directly at the surveillance drone, directly at them through the drone's sensors, as if he could see across the light years to where they watched. And then the Night King himself looked up. His crown of ice glittered in Kashyyyk's filtered sunlight. His eyes, pits of endless blue light, seemed to pierce through the recording, through space itself, to fix on each person in the command center individually. When he spoke, his voice came through the drone's audio pickups, but it also resonated in every Force-sensitive's mind, a sound like the heat death of the universe, like the last star going dark. I have waited 30,000 years. The seals are broken. The green seers are gone. The children of the forest are silent. There is no one left who remembers the ritual, no one left who knows how to unmake themselves for the greater good. And even if they did, the image zoomed in impossibly close on his face, showing something that might have been a smile. I have learned. The ritual will not work twice. I have made certain of that. The transmission cut out. The drone had frozen solid and fallen from orbit, crashing into Kashyyyk's ice-locked forests. The command center was silent. Everyone processed what they'd just heard. The Night King had anticipated them, had known they would search for the ritual, and had somehow nullified it, made it impossible to repeat what the children of the forest had done. "Then we're finished," Ki-Adi-Mundi said, his usual stoic demeanor cracking. "If the ritual doesn't work, if there's no way to seal him away, then there's no hope. We're just delaying the inevitable." "No," Anakin said suddenly, his voice cutting through the despair. "No, he made a mistake. He told us too much." "What do you mean?" Ahsoka asked. Anakin manipulated the holographic display, pulling up the recording and analyzing it frame by frame. "He said the ritual won't work twice, which means he had to actively do something to prevent it. He didn't just get stronger or evolve. He took specific action to block the ritual. Which means there are rules he has to follow, limitations he's bound by." "Go on," Yoda said, his ears perking up with interest. "Think about it," Anakin continued, his strategic mind working rapidly. "Why destroy historical records? Why target information about the children of the forest? If he was truly invincible, he wouldn't care what we knew. The fact that he's afraid of knowledge means knowledge can hurt him." "But he just said the ritual won't work," Dooku objected. "He said it won't work twice," Anakin corrected. "Maybe we can't repeat exactly what was done before. But what if we can modify it, adapt it, use the same principles but apply them differently?" Obi-Wan caught on to his former Padawan's logic. "He's blocked one door, but that doesn't mean there aren't other entrances. We need to understand the fundamental mechanics of the original ritual, then find a new application." "Precisely," Mace Windu said, hope kindling in his voice for the first time in days. "Ventress, your Sith texts, did they describe how the ritual worked? Not just what was sacrificed, but the mechanics of it?" Ventress scrolled through her datapad, scanning ancient documents. Fragments. The ritual involved binding. The Green Seers bound their existence to the cold, becoming one with it and then unmade themselves. Since they were bound to it, their unmaking unmade it as well, or at least sealed it away in the same non-existence they entered. "Quantum entanglement on a metaphysical level," Admiral Yularen said surprisingly. At everyone's looks, he shrugged. "I studied theoretical physics before joining the military. What she's describing is creating a connection so fundamental that destroying one part destroys the other, or in this case, unmaking one unmakes the other. So we need to bind someone to the Night King," Shakti said slowly, "and then unmake that person, dragging the Night King into non-existence with them." "But he's blocked that approach," Grievous pointed out. "He said the ritual won't work twice. Presumably he's severed whatever connections made him vulnerable to that kind of binding." "To the original ritual, yes," Anakin said, his mind racing. "But what if we create a new binding, something he hasn't anticipated or defended against?" "Through the Force," Ahsoka said suddenly, understanding dawning. "The original ritual probably didn't use the Force. The children of the forest existed before the Force was understood. But we have the Force. What if we use it to create a binding that didn't exist before?" Yoda was nodding slowly, his ancient mind working through the implications. Yes, I see. A Force bond, but deeper than any attempted before. Not just mental connection, not just shared consciousness. Complete merger. Two beings becoming one, so thoroughly entangled that one cannot exist without the other. "And then," Obi-Wan said quietly, "one unmakes themselves, and the bond drags the other into non-existence as well." The enormity of what they were proposing settled over everyone. They weren't just talking about sacrifice anymore. They were talking about weaponizing existence itself. turning the very concept of being into a trap for the Night King. It's theoretically possible, Dooku admitted, his Sith training making him more comfortable with such dark concepts. I've studied force bonds extensively. The deepest ones, between master and apprentice, between lovers, between parent and child, can persist even across death. But what you're describing would require a bond so complete, so absolute, that the two beings essentially become one entity split across two bodies. Can such a thing be formed artificially? Mace Windu asked. Or does it require natural development over years? Both, Yoda said. Natural bonds take time, yes, but artificial bonds with proper ritual and sufficient force power, possible they are, dangerous, often resulting in madness, but possible. So our plan is, Anakin summarized, to create an artificial force bond between someone and the Night King, make it so deep and absolute that they become metaphysically entangled, and then have that person unmake themselves from existence, dragging the Night King into oblivion with them. When you phrase it like that, Obi-Wan said dryly, it sounds completely insane. Better than any other plan we have, Grievous said pragmatically, which is to say, it's the only plan we have. There's a major problem, Ventress pointed out. To create a force bond with someone, you need their cooperation, or at least their presence. The Night King isn't exactly going to stand still while we perform a ritual on him. And there's another problem, Shakti added. Who performs this sacrifice? Who volunteers to be erased from existence? Because make no mistake, whoever does this won't just die. They'll never have existed. Every choice they made, every person they influenced, every impact they had on the galaxy will be undone. It's like writing a story and then erasing every letter, leaving not even blank pages but no book at all. Everyone in the command center looked at each other, the question hanging heavy in the recycled air. Who among them would volunteer for this? Who would choose to never have been? Before anyone could speak, the alarms blared again. Both Awui's orbital sensors had detected something new. A fleet was approaching, not Republic, not Separatist, frozen ships, hundreds of them, cruisers, destroyers, fighters, all coated in ice, all radiating impossible cold, all crewed by beings with glowing blue eyes. And at the center of the fleet, moving through space as if it were water, surrounded by a corona of absolute zero, stood the Night King himself. He was coming to Bothawooi. He was coming for them, and they had maybe 12 hours before the cold claimed their last stronghold. The sky above Bothawooi turned white with impossible snow. Not the gentle flakes of a natural winter, but a blizzard that materialized from nowhere, coating the tropical world's humid atmosphere in crystalline death. Temperature sensors across the planet went haywire as readings dropped 50 degrees in the first hour, 100 in the second. Ice formed on ocean surfaces that had never known frost. Forests that had stood for millennia began to crystallize, their leaves turning to brittle glass that shattered in winds that screamed with voices older than civilization. In orbit, the Republic and Separatist fleets formed a desperate united front. Venator-class star destroyers flew in formation with Providence-class dreadnoughts. Clone fighters covered vulture droids. ARC-170s and Tri-fighters worked together to establish defensive perimeters around the evacuation transports desperately trying to escape the dying world. But the frozen fleet was already there. Admiral Yularen stood on the bridge of the Negotiator, watching his tactical displays with the calm of a man who'd accepted his own death and was determined to make it count. All ships, weapons free, target their capital ships first. We need to buy the transport's time. The space around Bothawui erupted in fire and ice. Turbo laser batteries from both sides poured concentrated plasma into the frozen fleet, and for a moment, just a moment, it seemed to be working. Frozen cruisers shattered under the sustained barrage, breaking apart into fragments that drifted through space, trailing crystalline debris. But then the fragments moved. Pieces of frozen ships, hull sections, severed corridors, even individual frozen corpses blown into vacuum, all began propelling themselves toward the living fleet. Not with engines, but through some impossible force, as if the very concept of cold could generate thrust, and wherever they touched living ships, ice spread. "Evasive maneuvers," Yularen ordered, but several frigates were already compromised. Ice crawled across their hulls, invading through hull breaches, spreading through corridors faster than crew could seal bulkheads. Within minutes, entire ships went dark, their lights flickering out as power systems froze solid, and then those ships' weapons turned on their allies. On the planet's surface, the Joint Command Center had become a fortress under siege. Jedi and Sith worked alongside Republic officers and Separatist generals, all united by the simple understanding that the being descending from orbit would kill them all equally. Anakin stood at a viewport, watching the Night Kings approach. The being wasn't in a ship, didn't need one. He simply walked through space, frost spreading from each step like ripples on frozen water. And where that frost touched reality, reality changed. Space itself seemed to crystallize around him, forming impossible structures of frozen vacuum that defied every law of physics. "He's not just traveling through space," Obi-Wan said beside him, reaching out through the Force to sense what approached. "He's transforming it, rewriting the rules of reality to accommodate his existence." "Can he be stopped?" Anakin asked, though he already knew the answer. "By conventional means, no." Obi-Wan turned to face his former Padawan. "Which is why we need the ritual, the Force bond, and we need it now." In the central chamber, Yoda had assembled both the Jedi Council and the Separatist leadership. Count Dooku, Mace Windu, Asajj Ventress, General Grievous, enemies who'd spent years trying to kill each other, now stood in a circle, bound by desperation. "The plan we have discussed," Yoda began without preamble. "Execute it now, we must. No more time for research. No more time for preparation. The Night King comes, and ready we are not, but act we must anyway." "The ritual requires a volunteer," Mace Windu said, looking around the circle. "Someone willing to form a Force bond with the Night King, merge with him completely, and then unmake themselves from existence, taking him with them." "I'll do it," Anakin said immediately. Every head turned toward him. "I'm strong in the Force, powerful enough to create the bond, and I'm expendable." "You're the chosen one," Obi-Wan protested. "Prophecy says you'll bring balance to the Force. You can't—" "Prophecy means nothing if there's no one left alive to witness it," Anakin interrupted. "I've seen what the Night King does. I've watched worlds freeze, watched people I knew become monsters. If my death, my non-existence can stop it, then that's what I'll do." "No," another voice said firmly. Everyone turned to see Count Dooku step forward. "Not you, Skywalker. It has to be me." The shock was palpable. The Sith Lord who'd orchestrated the Clone Wars, who'd killed countless Jedi, who'd spread suffering across the galaxy, volunteering for sacrifice. "You," Mace Windu said skeptically, "why would you offer yourself?" Dooku's expression was unreadable. Because I'm old. Because my path is already set. Because... He paused, then continued quietly. Because perhaps this is the only way I can atone for what I've done. Not redemption, I'm past that. But at least an ending that matters. Your reasons are irrelevant, Ventress said coldly. What matters is capability. Master, you're powerful, but Skywalker is stronger. The bond requires raw force power. It requires more than power, Yoda interrupted. Understanding it requires willingness to let go of attachment, of ego, of self. Anakin, still learning these things you are. Dooku, acceptance he has already. Good or evil, right or wrong, past these distinctions he is. Anakin wanted to argue but couldn't. He knew his attachments to Padme, to his unborn children, to Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were his greatest strength and greatest weakness. Could he truly let go completely? Could he unmake himself knowing that Padme would forget he ever existed, that his children would never be born? There's another consideration, Obi-Wan said quietly. The ritual to create the Force bond. It requires multiple Force users working in concert, channeling enormous amounts of power through one person while they extend consciousness toward the target. We'll need every powerful Force-sensitive we have, Jedi and Sith both. An unprecedented cooperation, Ki-Adi-Mundi noted, light side and dark side working together for a common purpose. The Force is the Force, Dooku said with surprising gentleness. Light and dark are merely perspectives, tools we use to shape it. For this, we'll need both. The Jedi's compassion and the Sith's passion. Balance, for perhaps the first time in galactic history. How long do we have? Shakti asked, checking the tactical displays. The Night King will reach the surface in approximately 6 hours, Admiral Yularen reported via hologram. Our fleet is being systematically destroyed. We've lost 18 capital ships and counting. Evacuation transports are away, but they won't get far. His frozen fleet has established a blockade. Nothing leaves this system. Then we have 6 hours to prepare, Mace Windu declared. Dooku, if you're serious about this, I am. Then we begin preparation immediately. The ritual will require focus, preparation, and a direct confrontation with the Night King. We'll need to lure him to a specific location. He's coming here anyway, Grievous pointed out. He's drawn to command centers, to places of leadership. He'll want to break our alliance, turn us into his frozen soldiers, use us to command the armies of the dead. Then we give him what he wants, Anakin said. Let him come to the command center. We'll be waiting. The next hours passed in desperate preparation. The command center was cleared of non-essential personnel. Evacuation ships took refugees, support staff, anyone who couldn't contribute to the coming confrontation. Clone troopers and battle droids established defensive perimeters, armed with flamethrowers and thermal weapons, anything that generated heat. In the center chamber, Jedi and Sith worked together to inscribe ritual patterns on the floor, ancient symbols from both traditions, merged into something new. Obi-Wan worked alongside Ventress. Mace Windu consulted with Dooku on Sith rituals. Yoda meditated with the dark side users present, teaching them Jedi techniques for extended Force channeling. It was surreal, historic, a moment that should have represented the end of millennia of Jedi-Sith conflict. Instead, it represented the end of everything, unless they succeeded. Ahsoka found Anakin preparing in a side chamber, checking his lightsaber, adjusting his robes with nervous energy. "You wanted it to be you," she said without preamble. "I still do," Anakin admitted. "Dooku's a Sith Lord. Evil. He doesn't deserve..." "Doesn't deserve what? A meaningful death? A chance to matter?" Ahsoka shook her head. "Master, I learned from you that people are complicated. Maybe Dooku is trying to be better in his last moments. Maybe that counts for something. And if he fails, if he can't complete the ritual, then you'll have to do it," Ahsoka said simply. "But let him try first. Let someone who's done terrible things try to do one good thing before the end." Anakin looked at his former Padawan. When had she become so wise? And nodded. "If I don't survive this..." "Don't," Ahsoka interrupted. "Don't say goodbye. Not yet. We're Jedi. We don't give up until we're dead, and maybe not even then." The snow on both the Wui had become a full blizzard by the time the Night King touched down. Not at the command center directly, but in the city beyond. The civilian sectors where billions of Bothans huddled in their homes, hoping the cold would pass, that rescue would come. He walked through the streets, and where he walked, death followed. Bothans froze in their doorways. Families crystallized mid-embrace. Children became ice sculptures with their toys still in their hands, and then, one by one, their eyes opened, glowing blue, and they rose to serve. The frozen army swept through the city like a plague. Clone troopers and battle droids fought desperately to slow them, flamethrowers creating walls of heat, but it wasn't enough. For every frozen being destroyed, 10 more rose. The dead outnumbered the living, and the gap was widening by the minute. In the command center, sensors tracked the Night King's approach. He was taking his time, building his army, letting fear grow. Psychological warfare from a being who'd had 30,000 years to perfect it. "He's 3 kilometers out," Admiral Yularen reported, "still on foot, still surrounded by that cold field. Temperature where he's standing is reading minus 400 degrees. That's colder than space, colder than anything should be possible." "Positions," Mace Windu ordered. The Jedi and Sith formed a circle in the center chamber. 12 Force users total, 6 Jedi, 6 Darkside practitioners, more than had ever worked together in recorded history. At the circle's center stood Count Dooku, preparing himself for what he was about to attempt. "The bond must be absolute," Yoda reminded everyone. "Channel your power through Dooku, yes, but also your consciousness, your understanding of the Force, your connection to life itself. Make him so bright in the Force that the Night King cannot ignore him. Draw the Ancient One's attention, entangle them." "And when the bond is formed," Dooku asked. "Then let go," Yoda said simply, "of everything. Your name, your memories, your existence. Unmake yourself from reality, and trust that the bond will drag him with you into non-being." "Simple," Dooku said with dark humor. "Merely have to erase myself from the universe. My master would be proud." "Your master is watching," a new voice said. Everyone spun to see a hooded figure entering the chamber, elderly, grandfatherly, moving with a cane. Chancellor Palpatine. But there was something wrong about him. The Force screamed warnings, and as he pulled back his hood, his face shifted, wrinkled skin smoothing, kindly eyes becoming yellow with Sith corruption. "Hello, my old friends," Darth Sidious said, his voice dropping the grandfatherly pretense. "Did you really think I'd miss this historic moment? Jedi and Sith working together? The death of the galaxy's most ancient evil. I had to see it for myself." "Sidious," Mace Windu's hand went to his lightsaber. "You're Chancellor Palpatine." "For many years now, yes," Sidious said casually. "A useful cover. though it seems rather pointless to maintain it when we're all about to be frozen anyway, don't you think? Master, Dooku said quietly, you came. Of course I came, my apprentice, to witness your sacrifice, your final failure. Sidious's smile was cruel. You think you can save them, redeem yourself through noble death? You're still my pawn, Dooku, even in this. Maybe, Dooku replied calmly, but I'm a pawn who chooses his own final move. Before anyone could react, the temperature in the chamber dropped catastrophically. Frost exploded across every surface, and through the main entrance, moving with the inevitability of winter itself, stepped the Night King. He was taller in person, more terrible. His crown of ice caught the emergency lighting and refracted it in patterns that hurt to look at. His eyes, those pits of endless blue, swept across the assembled Force users with ancient recognition. He'd fought Force sensitives before, long ago, when they had different names and different teachings, but the same fundamental connection to the living energy of the universe. He'd killed them all then. He would kill these too. But first, he spoke, not with his mouth. That remained closed, frozen in eternal silence, but through the Force itself. Every Jedi and Sith heard his voice simultaneously, resonating in their minds like the death of stars. You cannot seal me again. The children are gone. The green seers are ended. Your ritual will fail, and you will become mine. Generals of the frozen dead. Commanders of eternal winter. Maybe, Mace Windu said, his purple lightsaber igniting. Or maybe we've found a new way. The battle began, Jedi and Sith working together, a dozen lightsabers blazing in coordinated defense, while Dooku stood at the center, gathering power for the ritual. The Night King didn't fight conventionally, didn't need weapons or techniques. He simply gestured and reality obeyed. Ice spikes erupted from the floor. The air itself froze into crystalline blades. Frozen corpses that had once been Bothan civilians poured through every entrance, their blue eyes reflecting the lightsaber glow. Anakin fought beside Ventress, their styles completely different but complementing each other. Obi-Wan protected Dooku's flank alongside Savage Opress, Dooku's former apprentice, their shared history forgotten in the face of extinction. And through it all, Dooku gathered power. He could feel the others channeling through him, Jedi compassion and Sith passion, light and dark, flowing into him like rivers merging into an ocean. His consciousness expanded, growing brighter in the Force, becoming a beacon that outshone everything else in the chamber. The Night King turned his full attention to Dooku, those terrible eyes fixed on the Sith Lord, and in them, Dooku saw recognition. The ancient being understood what was being attempted, and for the first time in 30,000 years, the Night King felt something like concern. The cold intensified. Several Jedi collapsed, ice forming in their lungs. Shakti went down, her skin turning blue-white. Ki-Adi-Mundi fell to his knees, frost covering his tall head. Now, Dooku! Yoda shouted. Extend yourself. Form the bond. Dooku reached out through the Force, not to attack, but to connect, to touch the vast, terrible coldness that was the Night King's essence. And in that touch, understanding flooded him. The Night King wasn't evil, wasn't cruel. He simply was. Like gravity, like entropy, like the heat death of the universe. He was the inevitable end of all things, given form and consciousness. Fighting him was like fighting the law that all things must end. But laws could be broken, rules could be rewritten. Dooku pushed deeper, forcing connection, creating a bridge between his existence and the Night King's anti-existence. The pain was indescribable, like trying to embrace antimatter, like forcing oil and water to mix on a fundamental level. But the ritual held. The other Force users poured everything they had into him, and Dooku became the point of contact between life and death, between being and non-being. The bond formed. For one eternal moment, Dooku and the Night King were one being. He felt 30,000 years of patience, of watching civilizations rise and fall, of waiting for seals to weaken. He felt the cold that had no end, the hunger that consumed all warmth, the absolute certainty that everything living was merely a temporary aberration in a universe that preferred death and stillness. And the Night King felt Dooku, felt regret and ambition, and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, evil could be redeemed through one final good act. Now, Yoda's voice cut through the connection. "Let go, Dooku, unmake yourself." But Dooku hesitated, because unmaking himself meant unmaking everything he'd touched. Every student he'd taught, every plan he'd made, every consequence of his existence would be erased, including the Clone Wars, including the death of the Jedi he'd orchestrated, including all the suffering he'd caused. If he unmade himself, all of that would be undone. The Jedi he'd killed would never have died. The worlds he'd devastated would be whole. The war itself might never have happened. It was redemption beyond anything he'd imagined. Not forgiveness, but erasure. A chance to undo every evil he'd committed by simply ceasing to have ever committed it. Yes, Count Dooku whispered to himself, to the Night King, to the universe. Yes, let it all be undone. And he let go, not just of life, but of existence itself. His name, his memories, his impact on reality, all of it released like breath into winter air. He felt himself coming apart, not dying but unbecoming, reality rewriting itself around the space where he'd been. The bond held, and through it, the Night King was dragged along. The ancient being fought, resisted, but the ritual was absolute. Bound to Dooku on a fundamental level, he had no choice but to follow into non-existence. For 30,000 years, the Night King had been patient, eternal, inevitable, but nothing is truly eternal. The Night King's last thought, as he felt reality forgetting him, was almost human. So this is how it ends. Not in cold, not in silence, but in the choice of one who became more than what he was. The chamber exploded with light, not heat, not energy, but pure erasure. A void opened where Dooku and the Night King had stood. And into that void, both beings fell. The Force bond snapped like a broken cable, lashing back at everyone present with psychic feedback that dropped Jedi and Sith alike. When the light faded, both were gone. Count Dooku and the Night King had ceased to exist in any form, not dead, not absorbed into the Force, simply not. And across the galaxy, change rippled backward through time like dominoes falling in reverse. The frozen worlds began to thaw. Beings with blue eyes collapsed as whatever had animated them vanished. Ice structures crumbled, the impossible cold retreated, fleeing from a universe that no longer acknowledged its existence. On Bothawui, the blizzard stopped. Temperature returned to normal levels. Frozen Bothans who'd been moments from death gasped as warmth returned to their bodies, though millions who'd already risen as the frozen dead simply collapsed, truly lifeless now. In orbit, the frozen fleet simply fell apart, the ice that held them together sublimating into nothing. And in the minds of those who remained in the command center, memories shifted. They remembered Count Dooku, but his history was different now. They remembered fighting the Night King, but the timeline felt fuzzy, uncertain, like a dream fading upon waking. Reality had been rewritten. The war Dooku orchestrated had happened differently, or perhaps not at all. The deaths he caused had been averted. His existence had been surgically removed from the timeline, and causality had adjusted accordingly. Anakin stood in the chamber, surrounded by confused Jedi and separatist officers who couldn't quite remember why they were all here. "What happened?" he asked. "Why am I on Botha-Wui? We were fighting something cold." "I remember ice," Ahsoka said uncertainly, "and fear, but the details fading, they are," Yoda said quietly. The ancient master's eyes were sad, but understanding. A sacrifice was made. Someone unmade themselves to save us all. And in the unmaking, reality forgot them, forgot what they did, forgot why we're here. "But we're here," Obi-Wan said, "which means something happened. Someone saved us." "Someone did," Mace Windu agreed. "We just can't remember who." In the corner, unnoticed by anyone, Darth Sidious, still wearing Palpatine's face, watched with narrow yellow eyes. He alone retained full memory, shielded by Sith techniques that existed outside normal causality. He'd watched his apprentice sacrifice himself, watched the Night King be unmade from reality, and he knew that without Dooku, without the Clone Wars he'd orchestrated, many of Sidious's plans would have to be remade. His path to galactic dominance had just become significantly more complicated. But he was patient, and the galaxy, while saved from the cold, was still ripe for conquest by those cunning enough to seize it. The Sith would survive. The Sith always survived. As the beings in the command center slowly pieced together fragmented memories of a threat they could barely recall, as fleets reorganized and evacuations were canceled, as life returned to a galaxy that had come within hours of eternal winter. Somewhere in the quantum foam between realities, in a space that was neither existence nor non-existence, two beings who no longer were occasionally flickered like ghosts of ghosts. Count Dooku and the Night King, bound together for eternity in the only place left for them. And if either felt regret or relief or anything at all, reality would never know, because they had never been. The galaxy remembered winter, but not why it ended. Historians would puzzle over the scattered reports of a brief ice age that had touched dozens of worlds, then vanished as mysteriously as it appeared. Climate scientists documented temperature anomalies that defied explanation. Military records showed fleets mobilizing against a threat whose name had been redacted or forgotten in every database. The Jedi archives contained fragments, references to an eternal cold, and something called children of the forest. But the context was lost, the connections severed. Master Yoda meditated on these mysteries, feeling in the Force an absence where something significant had once been. Like a missing tooth his tongue kept finding. On Coruscant, the Clone Wars continued, but differently. Without Count Dooku's specific machinations, the conflict evolved along alternate paths. Battles were fought in different places, alliances formed with different partners. The separatist movement found new leadership, and the war ground on, but not quite as it had before, in a timeline only Sidious fully remembered. Anakin Skywalker stood in the Jedi Temple, watching snow fall on Coruscant, natural snow this time, a routine weather pattern, and felt a strange gratitude he couldn't explain. Somewhere, someone had saved them all. Someone had given everything. He just wished he could remember their name. across the galaxy on worlds that had been frozen and thawed, in the minds of beings who'd glimpsed blue-eyed death and forgotten it. A whisper remained, not a memory, but an instinct, a knowledge buried so deep that consciousness couldn't access it. But the soul remembered. Winter had come. Winter had been defeated, and the price of survival had been someone's entire existence. In the Separatist Council chambers, newly appointed leaders argued over military strategy, none of them able to explain the gap in their organizational chart, the empty seat that felt significant but whose former occupant no one could name. General Grievous experienced strange moments of déjà vu, feeling he should be taking orders from someone who wasn't there. Asajj Ventress found herself training alone, certain she'd once had a master but unable to recall his face or voice. The feeling haunted her dreams, a tall figure in dark robes, aristocratic and cold, who'd taught her everything and then simply wasn't. In the depths of space, on Tatooine's warming sands and Kashyyyk's thawing forests, subtle scars remained. Frost patterns that shouldn't exist in desert rock, ice formations in tropical canopies that refused to melt completely, physical evidence of something impossible that had happened and been erased, leaving only these strange contradictions. The Force itself seemed to remember in its own way. Sensitive Jedi reported feeling a cold spot in their meditations, a place where the Force touched something that didn't touch back, an echo of a threat that had almost consumed everything. Padme Amidala, senator of Naboo, woke from recurring dreams of ice and blue eyes, clutching her stomach where twin lives grew, and felt relief she couldn't justify. She'd been saved from something. They'd all been saved, but by whom? The answer was lost to time, erased from reality itself, and perhaps that was fitting. The greatest heroes aren't always remembered. The most profound sacrifices sometimes erase themselves. Count Dooku had lived as a villain and died as something more, not redeemed, but undone, taking with him both his sins and the ancient evil that had nearly ended all life. Reality had been given a second chance, purchased at the price of one man's existence. The galaxy moved forward, unaware of how close it had come to eternal night. But somewhere in the quantum spaces between moments, in the gaps where causality couldn't quite stitch itself together, an echo remained. Two beings who'd been, then weren't, bound together in a place beyond existence. The Night King and Count Dooku, frozen in a moment that never was, in a space that didn't exist, paying the eternal price of salvation. Winter had come to the stars. Winter had been defeated. And the galaxy would never know who saved them. Perhaps that was the truest sacrifice of all, to save everyone and be forgotten entirely. The Force rippled with approval, and life continued warmer and brighter for the darkness that had been erased.